Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I moved into this old apartment 3 weeks ago. I picked it because it was cheap and because the neighborhood looked quiet. I saw the hallway, the creaky floors, and the faded paint on the walls. I noticed the small trap door in the ceiling the first time I walked through. There was no set of stairs, no pull-down ladder, no visible way to reach it. The landlord told me it led to a small attic space. He warned me not to open it under any circumstances. He said it was unsafe. He refused to give details, and I didn't push for more information. I thought it was just another quirk of an older place, but I was wrong. On my first night, everything was peaceful until around 2 in the morning. I woke up to a soft thumping noise above my head. It sounded like slow footsteps. I stayed in bed, eyes open, heart pounding. I tried to convince myself it was just the old building settling. Then I heard a low shuffle, like someone dragging a foot across the floorboards. I got up, turned on every light in the apartment, and looked around. My hands were sweating. My chest felt tight. I listened for a few minutes. There was only silence. Eventually, I went back to bed with my nerves on edge. The following night, the sounds returned. This time they came earlier, around midnight. I heard what sounded like 2 feet walking in uneven steps. The boards squeaked overhead. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. My pulse felt strong and uncomfortable in my neck. I got out of bed, walked into the hallway, and looked up at the trapdoor. The landlord had told me not to open it. He didn't give me a real reason. My curiosity felt stronger with every passing second. I stood there barefoot in my boxer shorts and a t-shirt, arms crossed, waiting for another sound. A dull scraping noise came from the trap door. It sounded like nails against the wood. My whole body tensed. I decided to try to ignore it for another night. I went to the kitchen, drank some water, and forced myself to lie down again. I pulled the covers up to my chin and kept my eyes on the ceiling. The noise would stop for a few minutes, then come back. At one point, I heard a soft whisper. I couldn't understand the words. It sounded like a plea. It rose and fell in a strange rhythm. I pressed my palms against my ears, feeling a cold sweat on my forehead. I didn't sleep well that night. In the morning, I checked every possible corner of the apartment that I could reach. I tapped the walls, looked for hidden doors, tried to see if there was any other entrance to the attic. I found nothing. The trap door was my only route up there. I stepped onto a chair and pressed my ear against the wood. I heard a dull echo of something moving. It sounded far off. I jumped down and cursed under my breath, then grabbed my phone to call the landlord. He picked up, sounding tired. I told him about the footsteps. He sighed and repeated his advice. He said I should leave the attic alone, that it wasn't safe. I asked if there were animals up there. He said no. I pressed him to explain, but he refused to talk about it. I felt a wave of frustration, but I stopped asking questions. I hung up, placed my phone on the counter, and looked up at the ceiling again. My stomach felt uneasy. I wiped my palms on my jeans and tried to think of something else. By the third night, I was on edge. I had trouble focusing on my work during the day, and I kept replaying the noises in my mind. That night, the sounds started again, but louder. There was a shuffle, a scratching noise, and a faint voice that sounded desperate. The voice had a hollow tone. I could hear it through the floorboards in the living room. I turned off the TV and stood under the spot that seemed to produce the noise. My chest felt tight again. I could feel my heart thumping. I took a few slow breaths, but I felt my hands trembling. It continued for a good hour. Whenever I moved, the noise seemed to pause. Then it started again. At around 1 a.m., I heard a series of quick taps on the attic floor. It made my skin crawl. I felt goosebumps on my arms. I ran to the hallway and stared at the trap door. The sound was right above me. I grabbed a broom from the closet. I raised it and tapped on the trapdoor 3 times. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, everything went silent. Then I heard the whisper again, this time right above the wood. It was low and quiet, but I felt it in my bones. I backed away, feeling my pulse racing. I decided I had to do something. I went to the local hardware store the next day and bought a small step ladder. I got home in the afternoon. The hallway was well lit, and the place seemed harmless in daylight. I set up the ladder under the trapdoor. My intention was to see if there was a latch or lock on the door. I climbed up slowly. My head felt light and I had a slight headache. I reached the door with my fingertips. I tried to push it open a fraction of an inch, but it didn't budge. It felt stuck. I gave it another nudge. Nothing happened. I tapped on it gently, listening for any sounds above. There were none. I climbed down, folded the ladder, and hid it in my bedroom. I decided to wait for that night to see if anything changed. Around 10 p.m., I turned off all the lights in the living room, leaving only a dim lamp in the hallway. I stood in the shadows near the trapdoor. I waited. An hour passed, and I heard nothing. Another hour. Still nothing. I started to relax, thinking maybe I'd imagined it all. Then, just before midnight, the scratching returned. It was so sudden that I almost jumped out of my skin. I heard a soft scraping sound followed by heavy, uneven footsteps moving across the attic floor. My scalp tingled. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. The whispering started again, but this time it felt closer. I heard short, clipped syllables, but I couldn't make out any words. It sounded like someone was trying to speak through clenched teeth. My mind raced. My breathing became shallow. I gripped the broom I'd left propped against the wall. I tapped the ceiling again. No response. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought I'd pass out. That night, I barely slept. I paced around my living room, drank a few cups of coffee, and kept glancing at the hallway. I felt the urge to open that door. The landlord's warning played in my head, but my curiosity was tearing at me. If there was something up there that needed help, or if it was just an animal, I couldn't let it keep scaring me like this. My nerves felt shot. The next day, I called an old friend who had some experience with old buildings. He said sometimes raccoons or large rodents get stuck in attics. He suggested I place some food in the hallway or set a trap. But he also told me that if the landlord warned me against opening it, maybe there was a liability issue. I didn't feel satisfied with that answer, but I agreed to wait a little longer. I thanked him, hung up, and tried to distract myself. I watched TV, took a walk around the block, and ate a late dinner. The entire time I felt this constant tension in my shoulders. That night was the worst so far. Around 11 p.m., I heard a loud thud in the attic. It made the light fixture in the hallway rattle. I jumped off the couch and ran to check. A low, grating sound came from above, like something heavy dragging across the floor. Then the whispering began again, louder than before. My mouth went dry. I felt a knot in my stomach. I climbed the ladder, broom in hand, and pressed one ear to the trapdoor. The voice was right there. It sounded angry or desperate. I couldn't tell which. My skin felt cold. I tried to push the door upward. It wouldn't move. I shoved it a bit harder. It stayed in place. I felt something push back from the other side, like a quick jolt. I lost my balance and nearly fell off the ladder. I scrambled down, my heart pounding so hard that I had trouble breathing. I stared up at the ceiling, half expecting the door to burst open. It stayed closed. The voice disappeared. I stood there in the hallway, breathing fast, arms shaking. I locked myself in the bedroom for the rest of the night. I turned up the volume on the TV and tried not to think about it. In the morning, I examined the trapdoor again. I noticed a slight gap near one corner, as if it had been shifted from the inside. I touched the wood and felt deep grooves, like scratches. That set me on edge. I didn't know if they were old marks or new. I wanted to move out, but my budget wouldn't allow it. I kept thinking about the landlord's warning. He must have known there was something strange up there. I decided to open the door that night no matter what happened. I set up the ladder again around 9 p.m. I took a flashlight and a crowbar. My plan was to pry the trapdoor open and at least see what was there. My nerves felt raw. My hands shook as I positioned the ladder. I stood there for about an hour, too scared to climb. I turned on all the lights in the hallway and the nearby rooms. The apartment felt cold, even though the thermostat read 72 degrees. Around 10 p.m., I heard the first creak in the attic. My breathing got shallow, and my hands went clammy. I took hold of the crowbar and climbed slowly. I placed the tool under the edge of the trapdoor and applied some pressure. The wood groaned. I felt a vibration through the crowbar. It was slight, but it felt like something bracing on the other side. I pushed harder, and I heard a scraping sound. The door began to lift slightly. Dust and small bits of debris fell into my eyes. I coughed and blinked, trying to clear my vision. Then I heard that voice again right on the other side of the door. It sounded pained and urgent. My heart raced so fast I thought I might pass out. I wanted to ask who was there, but my voice caught in my throat. My chest felt tight and my forehead was damp with sweat. I managed to push a bit more, creating a gap of about 2 inches. I aimed my flashlight into the opening. I saw darkness and dust in the beam of light. I tried to see if anything was moving. Suddenly, something slammed against the door from the inside. It banged so hard that the ladder shook. I lost my grip. My foot slipped on the step, and I dropped the crowbar. It clattered on the hallway floor. I grabbed the edge of the trapdoor to steady myself. The gap snapped shut, pinching my fingers hard. I gasped in pain and nearly fell off the ladder. My ring finger felt like it might have a fracture, but I wasn't sure. I stumbled down, hissing through my teeth. The door was closed again. I heard a faint whisper on the other side, then it went quiet. I backed away, clutching my hurt fingers. My breathing was rapid, and my heart was hammering. I felt dizzy. I turned off the flashlight and set it on the floor. I stared up at the trapdoor. The presence up there felt more real than ever. I couldn't think straight. My mind was racing with questions, but I had no answers. I paced around the apartment for another hour, trying to control my breathing. I kept checking the hallway to see if the trapdoor was still shut. It stayed in place, with that tiny gap near one corner. The scratches on the wood looked darker now, but that could have been my imagination. Around midnight, I realized I couldn't handle another night of this. I called the landlord, but he didn't pick up. I left him a message. My voice sounded shaky, even to my own ears. I told him what happened. I asked him to come inspect the attic, or at least call someone to do it. I also said if he didn't help me, I would find a way to break that door open and call the police if I found anything illegal. After I hung up, I sat on the couch, pressing ice against my bruised fingers. I stared at the ceiling, listening. I heard a slow, steady movement above me. It sounded like something pacing. It went on for about 10 minutes, then stopped. No more whispers, no more thuds, no more scratching. Just silence. I stayed awake until morning, waiting for another sound that never came. Right now, I'm still in the apartment. My finger hurts, but I can move it. I'm waiting to see if the landlord calls me back. My mind is filled with fear and questions. I can't shake the feeling that something is stuck up there, or that it's waiting for me to open that door again. I keep looking at the trap door, half expecting it to open by itself. I don't know how long I can stay here. Every time I walk through the hallway, I feel that same tension in my stomach, that same cold sweat on my neck. I hear echoes of that voice in my mind, replaying every desperate whisper. I don't know if I'll make it another night. But for now, the door stays shut, and I'm still here, listening for the next sound, wondering what I've let into my life by stepping foot into this place. I still get goosebumps when I think about the night everything changed. I'm not into superstition, and I don't scare easily. But this old building has a way of getting under my skin. It's quiet most of the time, almost too quiet. I like my privacy, so at first, the silence felt like a blessing. But when odd things started happening in the apartment next to mine, I couldn't ignore it. I moved into this place about 6 months ago. The rent was low, and the space was decent. The walls are thick, the ceilings are high, and the hallway lights flicker sometimes. The neighbors rarely say hello. I only see them in passing, usually carrying groceries or rushing to work. They keep their doors shut and their conversations hushed. It's a place where people mind their own business, which was perfect for me at the start. The apartment next to mine is on the right side of the hallway. The door looks the same as all the others, painted an off-white color with some chipping near the bottom. There's a peephole, but it's covered on the inside. I've tried to peek through it, but I see nothing. It's always dark in there. At first, I assumed someone lived there with a night job or something like that. I never saw anyone come in or out, so I figured they might leave at odd hours. But then I started noticing little things that didn't make sense. Sometimes late at night I saw a faint glow through the gap in the curtains. That was the first sign that something was off, because the apartment looked unoccupied. The blinds were usually closed tight, but the small slit near the side would let a line of light spill through. I kept telling myself someone must be inside, maybe a recluse who never goes out during the day. But even then, I couldn't explain the silence. No footsteps, no voices, no TV. It was just a glow that would vanish a few minutes later. One night around 2 in the morning, I heard music. It was soft, like a slow jazz tune, and it came from that apartment. I was sitting in my living room reading when the sound drifted through the wall. It didn't last long, maybe 15 or 20 seconds, and then it stopped. I pressed my ear against the wall to see if I could hear something else, but everything went quiet again. The next day, I walked into the hallway and listened by their door. Nothing. I considered knocking, but I felt uneasy. I didn't want to intrude, so I let it go. A few nights later, I heard the music again. It was around midnight this time. My bedroom shares a wall with the living room of the adjacent unit. At least I think that's the layout. The jazz melody was clearer, a bit louder, but still not at full volume. It lasted longer than before. I went to my window to see if maybe the music was coming from somewhere outside, but there was no one out in the street. When I looked across toward my neighbor's window, I noticed the curtains were slightly parted. A dim, warm light glowed inside. I stood there for a moment, trying to see if someone was moving around. That's when I spotted him. He was tall, wearing a dark long-sleeved shirt and dark pants. He stood with his back to the window, facing what looked like a mirror on a table or a dresser against the wall. I assumed he was just checking himself out. But then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. His reflection wasn't mirroring his movements. The man's shoulders lifted as if he took a deep breath, but the reflection's shoulders stayed down. Then his right hand moved toward his face, maybe wiping sweat or rubbing his jaw, but the reflection's hand stayed at its side. I felt a sudden chill in my arms and legs. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I kept blinking, trying to figure out if my vision was playing tricks on me. I thought maybe there was a second person behind him, or the glass was at a weird angle. But the reflection looked exactly like him. Same height, same shape, same clothes, except it wasn't copying him. And then it turned its head. I froze. The reflection's face turned to the side, and it looked straight out the window. It felt like it was looking right at me, even though the man in front of the mirror hadn't moved his head at all. My heart pounded, and I got a dull ache in my stomach. I stood perfectly still, afraid to step away. The reflection's gaze felt piercing, like it saw me. I wanted to wave or call out, but fear made my throat tight. The man himself never turned around. He kept facing the mirror, but his reflection kept staring. Then the reflection's mouth opened like it was smiling or about to say something. I heard a soft creak from the other side of the wall, and the light went off. Everything went dark in that window. The music stopped at the exact same time. I stood there, looking into that black window, breathing hard. I felt sweat on my forehead. My hands trembled a little, and I had to sit down on the edge of my bed. For a long time, I just stared at the floor. I tried telling myself there had to be a normal explanation, but my mind wouldn't settle. I couldn't sleep well that night, and the next morning, I went straight to the building manager's office. His name's Luis, a slightly older guy who's usually polite. I told him something strange was happening in the apartment next to mine. He looked at me, confused, and said no one had lived there for years. I asked if there was any recent tenant he didn't know about, or if someone had a spare key, but he insisted no. The place was empty. He even showed me a record of the last tenant. According to him, the owner put the unit up for sale and never found a buyer. The last tenant left at least 5 or 6 years ago. Luis offered to walk with me to the apartment and check the door. We went upstairs and he knocked. No response. He used the master key to unlock the door, but it wouldn't turn all the way. It felt jammed. He didn't want to force it open without calling the owner first. He apologized and told me he'd look into it. I went back to my place, frustrated and uneasy. I knew I wasn't imagining the lights or the music or that figure standing at the mirror. That night, I tried not to think about it. I watched some TV, ate a frozen dinner, and went to bed around 11. But I couldn't fall asleep. Every sound in the hallway made me flinch. My ears were on alert, waiting for any clue that something was happening next door. Around midnight, I heard a soft thump against the wall. It was subtle, like someone pressing their palm or shoulder against it. I got out of bed, turned on a small lamp, and stood by the wall. I pressed my ear against it and waited. I heard a faint scratching noise, like cloth rubbing against drywall. Then I heard the jazz music again, very low. My chest tightened. I stepped away from the wall and grabbed my phone. I thought about calling Luis, but it was late. I also felt embarrassed, like maybe I was overreacting. The music faded after a few moments. I decided to look out my window again. I didn't see any light in the next apartment. It was completely dark. I stared at that closed curtain, feeling my heart beat. Then a single line of light flicked on. A lamp or overhead fixture, I'm not sure which, lit the room. The curtain was still mostly shut, but I could see a small gap. I walked closer to my window and tried to keep my body out of sight. I caught another glimpse of the man. He stood in the same spot, near that mirror. This time, I only saw part of his torso and shoulders. He moved his right arm slowly, like he was picking something up from the table. I couldn't see his face at all. A second later, the reflection moved in a completely different way. The reflection leaned forward like it was peering closer to the glass. My mouth went dry. I felt tingles in my hands and feet. It was the same mismatch of movements as before. Then the reflection turned its head toward the window. It paused, like it was scanning the area. I ducked down, afraid it would see me again. My breathing sped up. I heard my heart thudding in my ears. I peeked over the windowsill, just a fraction of an inch. The reflection's head was still turned in my direction, but now the man's real body seemed to be facing the mirror. I couldn't make sense of it. Suddenly, the reflection lifted an arm and pointed toward me. My entire body seized up. I couldn't move for a second. I felt my legs weaken and I backed away from the window. I stumbled on a pile of magazines near my desk. I hit my elbow on the corner of the table and hissed in pain. When I looked back out the window, the light was off. I spent the rest of the night on my couch with the TV on, volume turned down, just to have some noise. Every few minutes I glanced at my window, expecting to see that glow or that figure again. Nothing happened. In the morning, I went to the hallway and found Luis in the corridor, changing a light bulb. I pulled him aside and told him about the music and the figure I'd seen in the window. I tried to describe the reflection not matching the man's movements, but I felt ridiculous. Luis looked confused and a little worried. He said he was waiting on a call back from the owner, and once he had permission, he would open the apartment. I asked if I could be there when he did. He shrugged and said sure, as long as I didn't mess with anything. For the next few days, I avoided looking at that apartment. I heard the music maybe once more, late at night, but I refused to go to the window. I kept telling myself I'd soon have answers. Luis would open that door and we'd see an empty unit with some broken wiring that caused lights to flicker. Maybe we'd find a squatter's den or old speakers on a timer. I clung to any normal explanation I could think of. Finally, on a Tuesday morning, Luis knocked on my door. He had a ring of keys in his hand and told me he'd gotten permission to enter the apartment. We walked to the door, and he tried the master key again. This time the lock turned. The door opened about an inch, but something was blocking it from the inside. Luis pushed harder, and the door jerked open with a scraping sound. We found a small pile of old cardboard boxes stacked behind it. Dust rose in the air, making me sneeze. Inside, the apartment looked abandoned. The lights were off. The air was stale, and the hardwood floor had cracks. We walked through the living room, checking for signs of life. There was no furniture except for a dusty old table in the corner. No chairs, no couch, no bed in the bedroom. There were no dishes in the kitchen cabinets. The walls had stains from water leaks. Luis opened the blinds to let in some light, and I looked around for a mirror, but I didn't see one. I felt a knot in my stomach. The place was empty, just as Luis had said. There wasn't a single sign of anyone living there. No bed sheets, no clothes, no electronics. The only odd thing was a faint smell of something like old cologne near one corner of the living room. I walked to the window that faced my apartment. The curtain was half off its rod, sagging in the middle. It was made of thick fabric, coated in dust. I tugged it aside. The view lined up exactly with my bedroom window. I pictured myself standing there, peering in. My eyes went to the corner of the room, where I thought I'd seen that tall man standing. There was no mirror, no table, nothing. Just a few dusty footprints, maybe from us or from long ago. It was hard to tell. Luis shrugged, said something about old buildings sometimes causing illusions, and left. I stayed behind, checking the other rooms, searching for any clue. I found nothing that explained the lights or the music or that figure. When I got back to my apartment, I felt uneasy and exhausted. I tried to carry on with my usual routine, but I kept hearing echoes of that jazz tune in my head. I didn't know what to believe anymore. A part of me felt relieved that the place was empty, but another part felt more disturbed than ever. If no one lived there, who did I see? That night, I forced myself to look out my window at around 11 p.m. The apartment next door was dark. The curtain was left open after our visit. I saw nothing unusual, just the dark room across the gap. I felt a bit calmer, thinking maybe the weird events had stopped. Then, just as I was about to turn away, a light flickered on in that living room. I saw it clearly. There was no lamp or fixture in there when we checked earlier, but I saw a faint glow, like a dirty bulb or maybe a candle. My heart pounded. I forced myself to keep watching. The air in my room felt cold against my skin. My neck stiffened. A tall silhouette appeared, blocking part of that faint glow. It looked exactly like the man I'd seen before. Broad shoulders, long arms, same outline. He stood near the corner, the same spot where we found nothing that morning. My breath caught in my throat. I waited. A second later, he turned around just enough for me to see the profile of his face. I couldn't make out details, just the general shape. He was definitely looking my way. I couldn't see his eyes, but I felt his stare. The hair on my arm stood up. My legs felt weak again. I reached for my phone, but I didn't call anyone. I just held it, uncertain. The figure stepped aside like he was moving toward the window. I thought he was going to come closer, but instead, he stopped. The music started again, faint at first. It sounded scratchy, like an old record player. My heart slammed in my chest. I wanted to tear my eyes away, but I couldn't. The figure slowly raised an arm, pointing directly at me. I knew he saw me. I backed up. My phone slipped out of my hand, hitting the floor with a thud. When I looked again, everything was dark. The light in the next apartment was off. The silhouette was gone. There was no music, just silence. I stood there, feeling my pulse in my temples. I stared at that empty window for what felt like an hour, but it must have been only a few minutes. I couldn't understand how that was possible, given we found nothing inside earlier that day. Now, as I'm sitting here telling you this, I still don't have answers. The building manager swears that place is empty. I haven't heard any official explanation. I haven't gone back in. I avoid passing that apartment at night. I've considered moving out, but my budget is tight and I keep hoping there's some normal explanation we're missing. But I can't forget the way that reflection turned to stare at me, or how the figure pointed. It was impossible, yet I saw it. I don't sleep well anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I hear those quiet jazz notes or I see that pale glow leaking through the curtain. Sometimes I wake up drenched in sweat, convinced there's someone standing just on the other side of the wall. But whenever I build up the courage to check, there's nothing. Just darkness. And sometimes that darkness feels like it's watching me. I can't say what's real anymore, but I know what I saw, and I know what I keep hearing. Even if nobody believes me, I can't deny it. Something is in that apartment, and it doesn't want me to ignore it. And the worst part is that I don't think I can. Every night I wait, listening for the next sound, dreading the next flash of light, and I have no idea how to make it stop. I never expected a boarded-up well in my backyard to grab hold of my mind. When I first moved into my old house in the countryside, I noticed that sealed structure right away. Thick wooden planks covered the top, secured with rusted nails. My grandfather mentioned it had been dry for decades, so I never thought much about it. I just assumed it was a hazard that nobody bothered to fill in. But a few weeks ago, I got curious. I decided to check how deep it was. That one choice changed everything. I waited for a clear afternoon. The sky was bright and there was no wind. I walked to the back of the house with my toolbox and stood over the well. The boards looked solid, but I could see gaps between them. I stood there for a moment, feeling the sun on my shoulders. I thought about whether this was a good idea. Then I crouched down and started prying loose the old nails. The wood creaked and dust rose into the air. My hands felt sweaty. I glanced around to make sure I was alone. There were no neighbors around, just fields and a few scattered trees. A dog barked in the distance, but I didn't see it. When I finally pulled the last plank away, I expected to see nothing but darkness. Instead, I paused because I heard something. It sounded like water dripping far below. I sat there listening. I thought maybe I imagined it. The well was supposed to be dry, at least according to everyone I'd talked to. But the dripping sound continued. It was steady, as if water was falling from some point high above onto a pool below. I leaned in closer, trying to see if there was any reflection. I couldn't make out much, just pitch-black emptiness. I got up, wiped my hands on my jeans, and took a deep breath. I thought I should drop a pebble or something to see how long it took to hit the bottom. I scanned the area and found a small rock near the edge of the yard. I tossed it in and listened. It clattered against the stone walls on the way down. Then I waited. I expected a dull thud of a rock hitting dirt. Instead, there was a faint splash, like it hit water. That made me pause. This well wasn't supposed to have any water. It had been labeled dry for as long as my family owned the property. I felt a sudden urge to call into the well. I wanted to hear the echo. I leaned over and shouted, "Hello!" My voice bounced back, but it was distorted in a strange way. It didn't sound like a normal echo. The return sound was lower and almost garbled. It made my skin crawl. My heart started beating faster. I tried to steady my breathing. I wasn't sure if something else down there had made a noise at the same time. It was like a whisper, but I couldn't make out words. I pulled back and felt an odd tingling in my arms. My instincts told me to close the well again and forget about it, but my curiosity wouldn't let me. I stood there for a few more minutes listening. The only sounds were water dripping and the wind rustling some tall grass behind me. Eventually, I put the boards back, hammered in a few nails to keep it shut, and walked back inside. I didn't say anything about it to anybody. Part of me felt stupid for thinking there was something unusual about an old well. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd heard voices. That night I struggled to sleep. I kept seeing the open well in my mind. Around midnight I felt wide awake, staring at the ceiling. At one point I turned on the lamp by my bed to see if reading would help me relax. My eyes drifted to the window, which faced the backyard. I sat up and looked outside. The well was hidden in the darkness, but I felt like I could sense its presence. I tried to ignore that thought and focus on my book, but my eyes kept shifting to the window. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep, but my dreams were uneasy. I saw myself standing at the edge of the well, looking down. I heard a voice whisper, "Come down here," in a low tone. I woke up covered in sweat. Over the next few days, I went about my usual business. I cleaned the house, did some repair work in the living room, and took care of the yard. But I couldn't stop thinking about the well. I felt drawn to it. Sometimes I stood in the kitchen looking out the window at those thick boards. My hands would get shaky and my mouth would go dry. It felt like the well was calling me. I knew it sounded crazy. I told myself it was just my imagination, maybe stirred up by that weird echo. But the feeling wouldn't go away. At night, my dreams got more intense. I heard the voice more clearly. Sometimes it sounded like many voices speaking at once. I saw images of dark stone walls and water trickling down them. In those dreams, I always felt cold and damp, like I was standing in a cave. When I woke up, I felt tired, as if I hadn't really rested. My heart pounded and my chest felt tight. I would lie there, breathing heavily, trying to calm down. After about a week of this, I decided to check the well again, just to put my mind at ease. It was early afternoon. The sun was bright, and I felt a little more confident. I grabbed a flashlight from the garage and headed out back. I pried the boards off, this time more carefully. I crouched down, leaning over the edge, and flicked on the flashlight. I pointed the beam straight down. I saw old stone walls and, maybe 20 feet below, what looked like water. It moved slightly, sending back a faint reflection. My throat felt dry. I couldn't understand how water could have come back to a well that was known to be dry for decades. I called out again, just to see if I could get a regular echo. My voice sounded normal as it went in, but the echo returned in a strange way, like it was broken up into bits and pieces. Then, after that echo faded, I heard what sounded like a whisper. It was a quick series of soft sounds, almost like syllables. My stomach twisted. I stood up, turned off the flashlight, and backed away. I decided to seal the well again, but the boards felt flimsy now. I hammered them back in and went inside. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink, scrubbing them even though they weren't really dirty. I felt a chill across my back. I paced around the living room for a while, trying to decide if I should tell someone about this. Maybe the local authorities, or maybe a plumber who could check the water table. But I thought people might think I was overreacting or imagining things. So I stayed quiet. That night I had the worst dream yet. I saw myself walking down a set of slimy steps inside the well. I don't know how those steps appeared, but in the dream, they were there. Each step I took was shaky. My flashlight flickered, and I heard dripping sounds echoing off the walls. The deeper I went, the colder it got. Then I heard that voice again. It said, "Keep coming. You're close." I felt panic, but I couldn't stop walking. Then I woke up, gasping for air. My sheets were damp with sweat. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. I got out of bed, walked into the bathroom, and splashed water on my face. My reflection looked exhausted. My eyes had dark circles. My hands trembled when I tried to dry my face with a towel. I decided to stay busy during the day to fight off the temptation to check the well. I painted the hallway, organized the garage, and tried to ignore any thoughts about that hole in the ground. But at night, I kept dreaming about it. I kept hearing the same voice. Sometimes I heard multiple voices. They spoke fast and I couldn't understand their words. But I felt pressure in my chest every time I dreamed about them. I started drinking coffee late at night, trying to stay awake because I didn't want to dream anymore. The feeling of being pulled toward the well grew stronger. Sometimes I caught myself standing by the back door, hand on the doorknob, ready to go outside. I never remembered getting up to do that. It was like I was sleepwalking. I had to double-check that the door was locked before I went to bed. I even moved some furniture in front of it once, just to be safe. One morning, I found muddy footprints leading from the backyard into the kitchen. They were the size of my own boots. I must have gone out there in the middle of the night, but I had no memory of it. My stomach sank when I realized how close I was to losing control. I tried to clean them up quickly, but my hands shook. I felt dizzy. It was hard to keep my thoughts straight. I kept hearing that dripping sound in my head. Later that day, I made up my mind to see what was going on in the well once and for all. I gathered some rope, a stronger flashlight, and a harness I had from an old rock climbing phase. I planned to lower myself just enough to see if there was any real passage, or if I was imagining some hidden chamber. I told myself I just needed answers. I wasn't going to climb to the bottom if it looked unsafe. I just wanted to see what was down there. Even as I planned this, I felt a sense of dread. My palms got slick with sweat when I handled the rope. My heart beat faster every time I thought about stepping over the edge. But I couldn't stop myself. I needed to break this hold the well had on me. That evening, I waited until the sun was directly overhead, so there'd be the most light possible. I set up a sturdy anchor by wrapping the rope around the base of a heavy metal post in my backyard. I tested the knots and my harness to make sure they were secure. Then, I pried off the boards again, feeling a cold rush of air from inside the well. I turned on my flashlight and clipped it to my harness so I could keep my hands free. I took a deep breath, knelt by the edge, and lowered my legs inside. The stone felt damp and rough against my boots. I kept my grip tight on the rope, inching down slowly. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing slick walls with some small patches of moss. Water dripped in some places, creating trails on the stone. The sound echoed, making it hard to tell where the water was coming from. My harness creaked as I shifted my weight. My breathing was quick and shallow, and I felt my chest tighten. I went down about 5 feet, then 10. The light from outside started to dim, and the darkness below grew thicker. I could see the water's surface maybe another 10 feet below me. It looked dark, with small ripples spreading across it. I paused, clinging to the rope. My flashlight flickered for a second, and I felt a jolt of panic. I heard that whispering sound again. It was faint, like someone murmuring right behind me. I spun around, nearly losing my footing, but there was nothing there. The walls of the well were solid stone. My pulse pounded in my ears. I dangled there for a moment, trying to decide if I should keep going. I didn't see any ledge or hidden tunnel. I leaned back, shining my flashlight in a slow circle. The well walls looked the same all around, wet, slick, and old. The water below was still except for a drip every few seconds. I started to think I had imagined the whispers. Maybe I was just sleep-deprived and hearing my own breath. Then I felt a vibration through the rope. It was small, like something tapped it from below. My heart jumped. I swallowed hard, tried to steady myself, and looked down. The water rippled again, but I couldn't see anything else. The moment that vibration ran through the rope, I heard another whisper, louder this time. It was right next to my ear, so close that I felt warm breath on my neck. It said, "Don't stop." I scrambled to climb back up, fumbling with the rope. My foot slipped on the wall and I slammed my knee against the stones. Pain shot up my leg and I gritted my teeth. I forced myself to keep climbing, pulling myself up hand over hand. My lungs burned as I panted. I reached the top and clambered out, collapsing onto the grass. My hands were raw and my knee throbbed. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I sat there for a while, just breathing. I could still hear whispers in my head, but outside it was quiet. The sun was high and the air was warm. Everything felt normal except for what I had just experienced. After a few minutes, I stood up, grabbed the boards and pounded them back into place. I put a heavy concrete block on top of them. I limped back into the house, locked the door, and sat at the kitchen table. My knee ached, and my muscles felt weak. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the darkness of the well. I felt that breath on my neck. My entire body shook at the memory. I drank cup after cup of water, pacing around my living room. I checked the back door multiple times to make sure it was locked. I even went to the window to see if the concrete block was still on the well. I could just make out its shape in the moonlight. Now every night I feel that pull again. It starts as a tingling in my arms. Then my chest tightens, and my breath quickens. I feel like there's a rope inside my stomach tugging me toward the backyard. I've tried to ignore it. I've tried to block it out with loud music, bright lights, anything to distract me. But it's getting worse. The whispers don't stop. They seep into my thoughts when I'm awake. They ask me to come back, to open the well, to climb down again and keep going. I don't know if they're real or if I've lost my mind. I just know that I feel them calling. And I can't say how much longer I'll be able to resist. I never liked people prying into my life. I lock my phone with a complex passcode. I shred my mail after I read it. And I never let anyone see what's on my computer screen. That's how I've always been. But everything changed when I moved into this old mansion. I expected isolation. I expected silence. Instead, I feel like I'm under constant surveillance by something I can't explain. I arrived here a few weeks ago. The place stood on a hill surrounded by an iron fence with patches of rust near the gate. The house looked neglected, but it had solid walls and more rooms than I could count during my first walkthrough. The previous owner left in a hurry, leaving behind furniture, drapes, and countless mirrors. In every room, there's at least one mirror, but many rooms have more than one. Some stand on the floor with wooden frames. Others hang on walls with chipped gold paint. Some look modern, with polished edges and no decoration at all. On my first night, I walked through the foyer and into the main living room. I turned on a tall lamp, and the light flickered for a moment before it settled. I looked at myself in the mirror above the fireplace. The surface had a few scratches, but my reflection seemed normal. I shrugged and chalked it up to the weird feeling of being in a big empty house. I felt the old floorboards creak under my feet. The room smelled faintly of dust and stale air. Then I heard a soft tapping noise like a nail scraping on glass. It lasted only a second or two. I glanced around and didn't see anything. I told myself it could be a branch from a nearby tree hitting a window. The next morning I woke up with a stiff neck. My bed was too big for me and the mattress felt lumpy. I got up and opened the bedroom curtains. The large mirror on the opposite wall caught the morning light, and for a moment I thought I saw a shape behind me. It wasn't just my reflection. It looked like a form that didn't match the outline of my body. I turned around quickly, but I saw nothing in the room. My heart pounded for a few seconds and I just stood there feeling my palms get clammy. Eventually I told myself it was a trick of the light. I walked downstairs to make breakfast, shaking off the weird feeling. I spent the rest of the day exploring the mansion. I needed to understand the layout. The corridor stretched on, and many doors led to storage rooms. Each one had at least one mirror. Some were small, leaning against a corner. Some were covered in dusty sheets. Others were tall and sat inside elaborate frames with patterns of flowers or swirling lines. I tried to count them, but I lost track. There must be dozens, maybe more. Each time I uncovered a mirror, I had a jolt in my chest like I expected something to jump out. It never did. Still, I felt uneasy every time I saw my reflection. At dinner, I set up a small table in the kitchen and ate a simple meal. The kitchen also had a mirror above the sink. It reflected a row of cabinets and part of the stove. At one point, I took a sip of water and looked at the mirror. I thought I saw movement, but it wasn't me. The figure in the mirror shifted to the left while I remained still. My hand shook and I spilled water on the counter. I put the glass down and leaned closer. The surface of the mirror just showed me the cabinets and the stove. Everything looked normal, but my pulse kept racing. I wiped up the water and decided to ignore it. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I didn't turn off the lamp because the dark felt oppressive. I heard random creaks and occasional soft thuds around the house. At one point it sounded like something brushed against the bedroom door. I stayed still, my breath shallow. Eventually, I got up and opened the door. The hallway was dim. A single light fixture at the far end gave off a weak glow. I glanced at the mirror on the wall across from my bedroom door. It stood tall, with a carved wooden frame. I took a few cautious steps, trying not to make the floor squeak. I tried to see if someone was there. I saw my reflection and behind me the open door to my bedroom. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe properly. Then I heard a soft whisper. I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like someone exhaling near my ear. I spun around and saw nobody. When I turned back to the mirror, my reflection looked normal, but I noticed a slight movement in the background of the glass. It was like a shadow passed along the hallway behind me, but there was no one there. Over the next few days, I tried covering up as many mirrors as I could. I used old sheets, towels, even cardboard. Sometimes the coverings fell off. Other times, the nails wouldn't stay put, or the tape wouldn't stick. It felt like the mirrors resisted any attempt to hide them. I discovered more mirrors in unexpected places. One was behind a closet door. Another was hidden in a little alcove under the stairs. Each time I found one, I felt an internal jolt. I kept feeling like I was being watched, even when I was alone in a hallway or in the bathroom. It was a nagging sensation, like eyes on the back of my head. One afternoon, I heard a dull thump in a storage room at the end of the corridor on the second floor. I opened the door and saw a large rectangular mirror lying face up on the floor. It wasn't there before. I was certain I left it propped against the wall the previous day. The mirror's surface looked warped like old glass sometimes does. I crouched down to inspect it. I saw my face, but there was a slight ripple, distorting my features. Then I saw something behind me in the reflection. It moved from one corner of the mirror to the other. It was too fast for me to make out details, but I sensed it was a human shape. My hands went numb. I whipped around. The room was empty except for a broken chair, some dusty boxes, and an old dresser. My heart hammered as I stood there trying to keep my breathing steady. I decided to move the mirror out of that room. I grabbed it by the edges and carried it into the hallway. It felt heavier than I expected, and I strained my arms. I placed it against the wall outside the storage room. My gut twisted because I didn't want to bring it with me, but I also didn't want it lying on the floor in that room. As soon as I stepped away, I heard a soft scraping noise, like something sliding against the wall. I turned and saw the mirror tilt slightly. It almost fell, but it stopped at an angle, reflecting part of the hallway. I left it there, feeling uneasy. I told myself I'd find a way to haul it to the basement later. That night, I tried to relax in the living room. I turned on the TV, but the reception was terrible. The screen flickered and the static drove me nuts, so I shut it off. The mirror above the fireplace caught my attention again. The house was quiet, but I kept hearing random pops like the wood in the walls shifting. I turned on a floor lamp in the corner, hoping more light would calm me. I stayed on the couch, eyes drifting between my phone and the mirror. At one point, I saw a faint shape on the mirror's surface, standing where the hallway behind me would be. My body stiffened, and I felt sweat break out on my forehead. I stood up and walked over to the fireplace. I stared into the mirror. My face looked pale and my hair was messy. Behind me, the doorway to the hall looked empty, yet the reflection hinted at a flicker of movement near the edge of the frame. I stepped away, not wanting to look anymore. The tension in this house weighed on me. My mind constantly jumped to the possibility that I wasn't alone. Sometimes I wondered if there was a hidden entrance or if someone else was living here. But I found no sign of forced entry, no footprints, no clues that a person was sneaking around. The only abnormal things were the mirrors and the distorted reflections I kept seeing. My nights turned restless. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, hearing sounds that vanished when I got up to investigate. After a full week of this, I tried a different approach. I purchased a bunch of blackout curtains from a local shop. I cut them into pieces and used them to cover the largest mirrors, securing them with nails. While hammering, I felt a weird vibration through the glass. Each time the hammer struck, the mirror seemed to shudder, but not in a typical way. It was more like a slight tremor that ran through the frame. I finally got everything covered. For a short while, I felt relief. I didn't see any reflections, distorted or otherwise. I started to believe I could live here without feeling monitored. The next morning, I found 2 curtains torn off and scattered on the floor. The nails were still in the wall, bent at odd angles. It looked like someone had pulled the fabric down with force. The mirrors behind them were exposed again. I felt a surge of anger and confusion. I didn't hear anything during the night, and I always locked the doors. I double-checked all the locks. Everything was secure. No broken windows, no footprints outside. Yet those curtains were ripped. I tried to cover them again. As I pressed the fabric against the mirror, I felt a cold breeze on the back of my neck, even though the windows were shut. I drove the nails in deeper this time. My arms ached, and sweat trickled down my temples. I kept expecting a hand to reach out of the mirror, but nothing happened. Eventually, I finished and moved on to the next mirror. Around midday, I sat down in the foyer to catch my breath. My back hurt, and I rubbed my shoulder. Then I noticed the large oval mirror hanging near the front door. I had covered it with a heavy blanket, but the blanket was gone. I looked around and saw it crumpled in the corner. I froze. My heart pounded as I realized all my effort seemed pointless. Something in this house wanted those mirrors uncovered. I felt a prickling sensation on my scalp, like the hair on the back of my head was standing up. I wiped my face with my sleeve, then picked up the blanket and forced myself to drape it back over the mirror. This time I taped the edges with thick duct tape and made sure it was secure. I kept expecting to hear tearing sounds or see the blanket fly off, but nothing happened right then. I walked to the stairs and heard a strange clinking noise coming from the second floor. It was faint, but clear enough to make me stop. I went up, step by step, trying not to make any noise. When I reached the top, the sound stopped. The hallway was dim, lit by a single overhead bulb. The mirror I had carried out of the storage room was still angled against the wall. I approached it cautiously. My reflection looked distorted, like my body was stretched. I felt a knot in my stomach. I leaned in closer. My face in the glass had an odd twist to it, as if my features were slightly off. Then, in the reflection, I saw movement behind me. I lurched back and spun around. The corridor was empty. I felt a surge of frustration and fear. My breathing grew fast, and I could almost feel my chest tightening. I began pacing, scanning each door. Then I heard a dull scrape again, like something moving against the floor. I turned the corner and saw another mirror I had never noticed before. It was perched on a small wooden stand. It faced an intersection of 2 halls, reflecting both directions. This mirror was uncovered. A fine layer of dust coated its edges, and there was a single handprint in the center of the glass. I stared at that handprint. It didn't match mine. It looked slightly larger, and the fingers were spaced differently. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wiped it with my shirt sleeve, but the smudge remained as if pressed from the other side. I looked down the left hallway, then the right. Nothing. I backed away, not wanting to see my own reflection anymore. My legs felt shaky. I realized I was sweating again, and a chill ran through me at the same time. I knew I wouldn't feel calm until I left that hallway, so I hurried back toward the staircase. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see another reflection or some shape at the edge of my vision. I went downstairs, grabbed my jacket, and stepped outside. The cold air hit me. I stood on the porch, breathing hard. The sky was overcast, and the wind rustled the bare branches of a few trees around the property. My mind raced with ideas. Maybe I could hire someone to remove all these mirrors. Maybe I could smash them. But I worried about what might happen if I did. I hated that thought, but it clung to me. I also felt uneasy about letting anyone else inside. I valued my privacy, but more than that, I didn't want anyone encountering whatever presence I felt here. As the afternoon light faded, I knew I had to go back in. The house was mine, and I wasn't ready to abandon it. Inside, I forced myself to walk from room to room, checking the covers on the mirrors. Some were still in place. Others had slid off or looked tampered with. My nerves were frayed. Every mirror felt charged with an energy I couldn't explain. The more I tried to hide them, the worse I felt, as if something was getting agitated. By the time night fell, I was exhausted. I locked myself in the master bedroom, leaving a small lamp on. I'm sitting here now on the edge of my bed, writing down these events on a notepad. I can hear soft scraping noises in the hallway. I keep glancing at the mirror on the wall across from me. I covered it earlier with a thick sheet, and I can see the corners curling, like something is tugging from behind. My hands are trembling, and my mouth is dry. I keep swallowing, trying to stay calm. I don't know what's in these mirrors or why this house has so many. I only know that I feel trapped and watched. Each time I blink, I imagine a figure standing behind me, waiting for me to slip up. All I can do is hold on to my sanity and hope that I find a way to either live with this or break free from it. For now, I'm stuck here, listening to the creaks in the darkness, never sure if my reflection is really mine anymore. I'm sitting in my living room right now and I can hear barking outside. It's faint, but it's there. It sounds close, even though I can't pinpoint a location. It makes my chest tight. I never had a problem sleeping before, but everything changed about a week ago. This barking started from nowhere in the middle of a quiet night, and it hasn't stopped since. It comes and goes, but it never really goes away. It's like a steady reminder that I might not be alone out here. I live in a small house far from any neighbors. The nearest town is about 20 minutes away by car. I chose this place because I wanted peace and quiet. I thought it would be perfect for focus and solitude. For the first few months it was. I heard birds, saw a few deer near the tree line, and enjoyed the wide open yard. The nights were silent, sometimes too silent. I liked it at first, but now I'm on edge every time the sun goes down. The barking began late one night, around 2 in the morning. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard a muffled bark. It was a sharp sound, but it wasn't repeated right away. I thought it might have been a coyote or maybe some dog that wandered onto the property. I assumed it would move on. I got up, looked out the window, but I didn't see anything. The moon was hidden behind clouds, so my yard looked like one big shadow. I went back to bed and tried to ignore it. The next day I checked around the yard for signs of a dog or any animal. The grass was undisturbed and I saw no paw prints in the dirt. I didn't think much of it. Later that night, though, I heard it again. This time it was louder and more persistent. The bark sounded rough, almost like a dog in distress, but there was a strange echo to it. I got up, walked to the window in the living room, and peeked through the blinds. I saw nothing except the empty yard. My floodlight was on, and everything looked normal. I decided to go outside. I turned on my porch light, slipped on my boots, and stepped out. The air was cold, and I felt goosebumps on my arms. I scanned the yard with a flashlight. I saw no animals, no movement. But I noticed a set of wet footprints on the porch. They weren't paw prints. They looked like random damp patches, as if water had dripped onto the wood. They started near the edge of the porch and led right up to my front door. There was no trail leading away. It was as if the footprints just stopped. I waited, listening. The barking went silent. I felt my stomach knot. I went back inside and locked the door. I stood there for a moment, trying to calm down. My breathing was shallow. My heart was pounding. I told myself there must be a dog in the area, maybe from a neighbor's farm. But why didn't I see it? And where did it go? I tried to sleep, but I kept hearing faint barks through the night. Every time I thought it stopped, it would start again. I heard it around the back of the house, near the side windows, and then near the front porch. It seemed to circle the place. By morning, I was exhausted. Over the next few days, the barking continued at random hours. Sometimes it was late at night, sometimes just after sunset. Other times, I heard it early in the morning before dawn. I started to feel uneasy in my own home. I'd hear a bark, run to the window, and see nothing. I'd step outside with a flashlight and find no animal. But I began noticing those wet footprints more often. They appeared on the porch, on the back steps, and even on the path that leads to the side of the house. The footprints always began at some random spot and ended abruptly. One night, the barking got worse. The moon was out at first, but then clouds rolled in and covered it. Everything turned pitch black. The barking echoed in the darkness, and it sounded louder than before. I stepped outside again, clutching my flashlight and scanning every inch of my yard. The barking would stop whenever I aimed the light in a certain direction, and then it would start up somewhere else. It felt like something was messing with me. I felt sweat gathering on my forehead, even though the air was chilly. I walked around the side of the house calling out, "Hey, is anybody there?" I was trying to see if maybe some person was lurking around. No response, just more barking from a different angle. My heart was pounding so hard that I felt a slight tremor in my arms. My flashlight began to shake. Then I felt something brush against my ankle. It was quick and light, like a small animal running past. I aimed the flashlight down. Nothing was there. My stomach lurched. I spun in a circle, shining the light everywhere, but saw no movement. I yelled, "What the hell?" My voice sounded shaky. The barking stopped again. I hurried inside, locked the door, and just stood there in the hallway. My breathing was ragged. My skin felt clammy. I didn't understand what was happening. I paced around the living room, checking the windows and flipping on every light in the house. I left the porch light on too. After a while, I sat down on my couch, staring at the door, waiting for the barking to start again. It didn't. When the sun rose, I realized I had stayed up the entire night. The next evening, I tried to prepare. I set up a camera on the front porch, pointed it at the yard. I placed another camera on the back porch. I wanted to catch footage of whatever was out there. I felt determined to figure this out. I even considered calling animal control, but I wasn't sure they would believe me. I had no idea how to describe these footprints. They looked wet, but they weren't shaped like paws or shoes. That night, the clouds covered the moon again. I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the monitor linked to my cameras. The barking started around midnight. It was faint at first. I turned up the volume on the monitor, but the cameras only picked up static and the rustling of leaves. I could hear the barking through the walls, so I knew it was real, but the cameras showed nothing. No movement, no animal. I felt my leg jiggle with nervous energy. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to stay calm. Then the barking got closer. It sounded like it was right on my porch. The monitor showed the porch light. The boards were empty. Then I heard a scraping sound at the door. I froze. My heart thudded in my chest. The monitor still showed nothing. I got up slowly and approached the door. The scraping turned into a soft, scratching noise. My hand hovered over the doorknob. I hesitated, then slowly turned the knob and pulled the door open an inch. Cold air hit my face. I peered outside. I saw wet footprints leading right up to the threshold. They were glistening under the porch light. There was a small puddle where they ended. I glanced around but saw no animal, no person. The yard was empty. The barking had stopped. I felt a chill creep up my spine. My eyes started to water, not from tears, but from the sheer tension. I realized I was holding my breath. I exhaled, slammed the door, and locked it again. That night, I barely slept. Each day, I questioned my sanity a little more. I started to notice small details. The nights seemed longer than usual. The sun took forever to rise, or at least that's how it felt. The barking got louder when the moon disappeared behind clouds, as if the darkness fed it. Sometimes during the daytime, I'd stand in the yard and stare at the spot where the footprints always seemed to appear. I never found any clue, never saw any disturbed earth or leftover water. It was like the footprints came from thin air. A few nights later, I was taking out the trash. It was around 8 in the evening, but already dark. As I walked back from the dumpster, I felt something brush against my leg again. My entire body tensed. I nearly dropped the flashlight. My eyes darted around. There was nothing there. But the barking started up a few feet away from me, loud and sharp. I aimed the flashlight, but it hit only grass in the side of the house. No dog in sight. I could hear my own heartbeat. It felt like my body was preparing to run, but I didn't know which way to go. The barking circled around me, sounding close, then far, then close again. I muttered, "No, No, no, and sprinted back to the house. I fumbled with the keys, got inside, and slammed the door. My hands were shaking for a good 10 minutes afterward. I kept trying to catch the presence on camera, but the recordings never showed anything unusual. I reviewed hours of footage every morning. Sometimes I'd see a slight flicker of light, or a shadow that moved in a strange way, but nothing concrete. The barking never registered as more than faint background noise. One night, I decided to stay in the back room with the lights out, just listening. I placed my phone on the window ledge, recording audio. Around 1 in the morning, the barking started again. This time it was steady and lasted at least 5 minutes without pausing. I heard twigs snapping in the yard. I heard the wind picking up. The barking grew louder, like it was right outside the window. My pulse quickened. I felt a drop of sweat roll down my temple. Then I heard a growl, deep and throaty. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I jumped to my feet, but I didn't open the window or turn on any lights. I just stood there, muscles tense, waiting. After a few seconds, the barking stopped. I heard something scrape against the wall outside, then silence. I listened to the audio the next morning. The barking and growling were loud and clear, but there was no explanation. It just started and stopped. I didn't know what to do with that. I felt a growing sense of dread. Each night I went to bed wondering if it would happen again, and it always did. Sometimes it was short, sometimes it stretched on for hours. A few days later, I was fixing a loose board on the back porch in the late afternoon. I could hear thunder in the distance, so I knew a storm was coming. The sky was darkening and the wind was picking up. I hurried to finish hammering the board in place. As I stood up, I felt a sudden coldness behind me. I spun around, expecting to see a storm gust swirl around the porch, but instead I saw a single wet footprint right in front of the back door. It looked fresh. I took a step back, trying to steady my breathing. The sky rumbled with thunder. There was no dog, no person, nothing that could have left that footprint. My mind started racing. I grabbed my tools and went inside, locking the door without even finishing the repair. That night, the barking returned with a new intensity. It sounded more frantic, more urgent. The thunderstorm raged outside and the rain pounded the roof. The barking almost blended with the sound of the storm, but it still stood out. I paced the living room, occasionally stopping near the window to look outside. Lightning flashed, and I saw the yard for a split second. It was empty. Then I heard another scrape at the front door. My heart lurched. I crept toward the door and put my ear against it. I heard a low, whimpering sound followed by a bark. I felt the doorknob vibrate, like something was pushing against it. A streak of lightning lit up the porch through the window, and I saw a shadow move past the light. Then it disappeared. I pulled away from the door, feeling my hand shake. My legs felt weak. The thunder shook the house. The doorknob rattled one more time, then went still. I waited in silence, trying not to make any noise. The barking moved around to the side of the house. I could hear it through the walls. Eventually, it faded into the storm. A few hours later, everything went quiet and the rain stopped. I stepped outside to survey the damage from the storm. The air felt heavy, my porch was soaked, and there were more of those wet footprints. Across the wood, leading nowhere. I followed a few of them down the steps, but they vanished a few feet from the house. I stood there, my clothes drenched from the leftover drizzle, scanning the yard. I heard my own shaky breath. My arms felt numb. Something was out there and I couldn't see it. Night after night, the barking continued. Sometimes it was a single bark that startled me out of sleep. Other times it was a long series of barks that made my stomach twist. I caught myself whispering, "Go away," like it could hear me. I tried leaving out scraps of food, thinking maybe it was a hungry dog. The food stayed untouched. I tried sprinkling flour on the porch to see if I could get clearer footprints, but all I found were the same strange wet patches that led to my door and stopped. Now, as I sit here, I can still hear that barking outside. It isn't stopping. The moon is hidden behind thick clouds, and I'm bracing myself for another long night. My throat feels dry. My arms are tense. I keep checking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something pass by the window. I don't know what it wants, and I don't know where it goes. Every time I step onto the porch, I see those footprints. Every time I try to follow them, they vanish in the grass. Some nights I feel something brush against my legs, and there's never anything there when I look down. I want to leave, but this is my home. I don't have another place to go right now. I don't know how to make it stop. I'm not even sure if it's an actual animal or something else. It feels like it's getting closer each night. The barking grows louder, the footprints get bolder, and the darkness lasts a little longer. I don't sleep much. I just pace around and wait for the barking to fade. Tonight it's coming in bursts. I hear it behind the house one moment, then near the front door the next. My skin is crawling and my heart won't slow down. I'm waiting for dawn, but I feel like the darkness is stretching on forever. The barking keeps going, and every time I check, I see nothing outside. I only find those wet footprints that seem to appear out of thin air. Something is out there, and it wants my attention. I don't know why, and I don't know what will happen when it finally makes itself known. I just know I can't ignore it anymore. Right now, I hear it barking again, and I feel that old rush of fear building in my chest. My hands are shaking and I can't stop them. This presence, whatever it is out in my yard. It's watching my house. It's scratching at the door. And I'm alone in here, listening, too afraid to step outside again. I stared at the security monitor and saw a shadow move across the sculpture hall. It was a faint blur on the screen, but it made my heart pound. I blinked and looked again, trying to figure out if my eyes were playing tricks on me. The shape was gone, and the corridor looked empty. My shift had only started, but that single moment got my nerves on edge. I took a deep breath, told myself it was probably a glitch, and grabbed my flashlight. I couldn't ignore that feeling in my gut. I'm the night watchman in a historical museum. I've been working here for about 6 months. The museum has a lot of wings: paintings, archaeological finds, old manuscripts, and a big area dedicated to sculptures. Each night, I walk the corridors, check the cameras, and lock up if needed. It's usually quiet. Most nights, I only hear the hum of the air conditioning and my own footsteps echoing on the tile floors. But things started to feel strange about a month ago. It began with soft footsteps. I'd be in the sculpture wing, shining my flashlight across the marble floors and shining it on the tall statues. I'd walk slowly, making sure the doors were locked and the alarm sensors were on. Then I'd hear the faint sound of steps right behind me. They weren't loud, more like gentle taps. Sometimes they echoed against the walls, making it impossible to pinpoint the source. When I turned around, I saw no one. I'd wait a few seconds, holding my breath, but nothing happened. Then I moved on. The first few times I brushed it off as my own footsteps bouncing back in that big hall. But the noise got worse. One night I heard those steps circling me. I was standing near a statue in the corner, checking the base for any sign of tampering, when I heard a few steps coming from my right. I spun around and aimed my flashlight across the rows of sculptures. I didn't see anyone, so I stayed still. Then the footsteps seemed to come from my left. I turned my head and heard another set of steps behind me. My hands started to tremble. My flashlight beam was shaking on the walls. Every time I thought I had a direction, the steps stopped, like they were playing hide and seek. My throat felt tight and my chest got heavy. I forced myself to stand there for a bit. Then I walked away, telling myself I'd check the security monitors. On the monitors, everything was empty. The corridors were dead still. No movement at all. I felt foolish, but I knew something was off. My pulse was still racing. I realized a layer of sweat off my forehead. The air conditioner was running, but I was sweating like I'd just run a mile. I told myself that maybe the building was settling or that the air vents were making weird echoes. But a part of me sensed that wasn't right. I couldn't forget how distinct those footsteps sounded. Another time I found strange footprints on the floor. The museum's floors are usually polished every morning, and the cleaning crew is pretty thorough. That night I was doing my rounds near the Roman bust exhibit. I saw dusty footprints leading from the main door toward the center of the room. The footprints were smaller than my boots, but I couldn't identify the exact shoe size. They weren't huge, but they weren't child-sized either. I followed them with my flashlight, crouching to see if they led anywhere specific. They just stopped a few feet past the main door, as though the person vanished or lifted straight off the ground. I looked around, aiming my light under the display cases and behind the pedestals. I found no one hiding there. I got that prickly feeling on the back of my neck, like somebody was behind me, watching. When I glanced over my shoulder, I saw the same row of old Roman busts with blank eyes. They always looked a bit eerie under the dim lights at night, but this time, I could have sworn one of them was facing a different angle. The face was tilted slightly, pointed my way. I froze, shining my flashlight directly on it. The marble expression was the same as always, lips parted in that stiff, ancient style. Still, I felt like it had moved. I wanted to get out of there, but I had to stay. I'm paid to keep the place secure, so I tried to stay calm. I walked closer to the bust, trying to see if maybe it was always pointed in that direction. I touched it gently, checking if it was loose or if the maintenance team had shifted it. It seemed solid. I looked at the base and saw nothing unusual. I examined the label to see if maybe it had been recently repositioned, but there was no note on that. My arms felt a little shaky, and my breathing was uneven. I told myself it must be my imagination, so I moved to the next room. The next evening, I heard a faint scraping sound near the Greek statues. They're life-size figures on tall pedestals. They show various poses of mythological characters, all carved in stone. When I heard the noise, I walked down the row, shining my flashlight along the floor. I saw something near one of the pedestals. It looked like tiny flakes of stone. I kneeled and ran my fingertips over the pieces. They felt gritty. I looked up at the statue. It was a figure of some ancient hero, arms raised as if wielding a spear. I scanned every part of the statue, searching for damage, but I didn't see any fresh break. The statue looked fine, though I noticed a slight shift in the position of its head. Again, I felt like it was angled differently than usual. I backed away, gripping my flashlight tighter. My heart was beating hard against my ribs. Later that night, I was back in the security room, checking all the camera feeds. Nothing showed up that explained the scraping noise. I rubbed my eyes and checked again, zooming in on the statue area. Everything was still. I got up and paced around the desk, took a sip of cold coffee and listened for anything outside the door. I heard a thud in the distance and jumped. I set my coffee on the desk and grabbed my flashlight. My hand was shaking so much that the coffee cup rattled against the surface. I left it there and moved into the corridor. The sound came from the sculpture wing. I walked carefully, stepping on the polished floor. My footsteps sounded too loud in my own ears. I reached the corner and peered around. The overhead lights were low, just enough to make out shapes and outlines of the statues. I saw the statue of the ancient hero on the left. It looked the same, but I felt that strange sensation again, like it was staring at me. I inhaled through my nose and tried to hold my breath to listen. Then I heard it, soft breathing right behind me. I spun around, my flashlight shaking. No one was there. The corridor behind me was empty. My hair stood on end, and my skin went cold. The breath sounded like a quick exhale, short and sharp. I let out a curse and ran my free hand over my face. I told myself to keep it together, but I was rattled. I aimed the flashlight all over the corridor, up and down. I only saw more statues in the corners of the tall walls. No figure lurking. No intruder. I walked toward the next room, checking doors along the way. All of them were locked. I tested the handles, pulled them, even tugged a bit harder than usual. Nothing. I looked at the floor to see if there were footprints again. Not this time. The tile was clean, reflecting the dull glow of the overhead lights. I called out a quick, "Is anyone here?" My voice echoed. No answer. That night ended with me back in the security room, counting the minutes until my shift was over. My stomach was in knots. I kept glancing at the monitors, half expecting to see some figure moving across the halls. It never appeared. My anxiety was so high that my legs were jittery under the desk. In the following days, I tried to calm my mind by arriving early, walking the halls in the daylight before my shift. Everything looked normal in daylight. The statues seemed harmless. Their expressions, though still a bit eerie, didn't bother me as much. The curator and the day staff moved around, checking displays, dusting frames. Everything was straightforward. Once night fell, though, the entire atmosphere changed. The silence felt denser, and every little noise made me flinch. One evening, I started my usual routine at 10 p.m. I made a slow walk around the main entrance, the medieval armor exhibit, and the painting gallery. Then I took a deep breath and headed toward the sculpture wing. There's a wide hallway leading into it, lined with smaller artifacts in glass cases. As I approached the entrance, I heard a faint tap, like knuckles on a wall. It came from inside the wing. I paused and pressed my ear to the open doorway. Nothing. I stepped inside, shining my flashlight from left to right. The statues were lined up on both sides, raised on pedestals, some behind ropes, others close enough to touch. I walked to the center of the room, pausing every few steps. My shoes squeaked on the floor and I tried to walk more quietly. Then I felt a sudden chill on the back of my neck. It was like a gust of air, except there were no vents that close to me. I whipped around, brandishing my flashlight at chest height, ready to see a face. Again, there was nothing, but the cold feeling lingered on my skin. It made me shiver. I forced myself to check each statue. I looked at the base, the label, the posture of the figure. I remembered them well from the past nights, so I was hoping to see if anything changed. Most were in the same position they always were. Then I reached one of the centerpieces, a statue of a robed figure with an outstretched arm. Something was off. The outstretched arm seemed a bit higher than I remembered. I knelt down, resting my flashlight on the floor to shine upward. I stared at the arm, trying to recall its usual angle. My chest felt tight as I realized it was definitely raised more. It was subtle, but it seemed different. I leaned forward, touched the stone, and felt a chill creep up my spine. I jerked my hand back. My radio crackled with static and I almost yelped from surprise. I fumbled for it on my belt, pressed the button, and said, "Yes, I'm here." No response. More static. Then it went silent. I clipped it back and stood up. I tried to steady my breathing. My hands were clammy. I looked around for any sign of forced entry or tools that might indicate vandalism. Nothing. I made my way out of the sculpture wing and into the next corridor, checking for open doors. Everything was locked tight. At that point, I decided to document things more thoroughly. I found an old notebook in the security room. Each night, after each round, I wrote down everything I saw. I made notes about footprints, statue positions, new noises, anything that felt out of place. I included times so I could check the camera footage later. One night around 2 a.m. I wrote, "Heard heavy breathing behind me near the Greek statue. Turned around, nobody was there. Saw slight chips on the statue's pedestal." Another night I wrote, "Found 3 sets of footprints near the Roman busts. They disappeared halfway across the floor." I tried to talk about these events with one of the day guards, a guy named Marcus. I asked if he'd ever seen anything weird in the sculpture hall. He shrugged and said, "Not really." He joked about the place being spooky after hours, but he didn't mention anything concrete. I didn't push it. I felt embarrassed, like I was going crazy. But I kept writing in my notebook. Each entry made me more convinced something was happening. One night I was checking the cameras as usual. Around 3 a.m. I switched to the feed for the north corridor. I saw a flicker of motion at the edge of the screen. I leaned in, adjusting the angle. My heart thudded when I realized it was a statue's head. The head turned slightly, almost like it was nodding. Then the camera feed glitched, and everything went black. I muttered a few curses, slapped the side of the monitor, and waited for it to come back. When the feed returned, The statue was in its normal position. I rewound the footage and looked again. The glitch repeated at the exact same second, and I couldn't see the movement anymore. I felt a rush of cold in my veins. I slammed the keyboard, feeling frustrated and unsettled. I got up and went straight to that corridor with my flashlight. The statues were lined up as usual. No sign of movement. The hallway was cold, and I could hear a faint buzzing from the overhead lighting. I approached the statue I saw on the screen. It was an old piece showing a regal figure wearing a formal robe. I moved around it, examining the base, the pedestal, and the tag. Nothing was out of place. I felt a pressure in my chest, like I was holding my breath for too long. I exhaled and forced myself to calm down. Then I leaned in close to the statue's face. Its blank eyes stared past me. I noticed a slight tilt that I hadn't seen before. My pulse raced again. I pulled out my phone and tried to snap a picture, thinking I'd compare it later with an older photo. My phone's camera refused to focus. The image looked blurry, and the lens kept adjusting. I took 3 pictures, and then checked the gallery. Each one was distorted or out of focus. I rubbed the phone's lens with my shirt, thinking it was dirty, but the result was the same. I shoved the phone in my pocket and turned away. Every hair on my arm stood up, and I felt a pulse in my neck that pounded. I left that corridor and returned to the security room, feeling drained. The last few nights have been like this. I walk around, hear steps that can't be mine, feel a cold breath on my face, see footprints that vanish. Sometimes I find pedestals shifted by an inch or so. Occasionally, I see dust or chips on the floor, as if a statue moved. I can't explain it. I never see an actual figure walking, but I sense it. I sense something right behind me, just out of sight. My hands sweat, my throat gets dry, and my back feels tense all the time. I keep telling myself there must be a rational explanation. Maybe the cleaning crew is messing around, or maybe the old building is full of drafts. But I can't shake the feeling that these statues are changing positions when no one's looking. The footprints, the soft breathing, the static on my radio. It all points to something I can't explain. Tonight, as I write this in my notebook, I can hear the faint sound of steps in the next room. My heart is pounding. My flashlight is on my desk, but I haven't picked it up yet. I'm trying to calm down before I go check. My hands are trembling, and I can't decide if I want to walk in there or stay put and pretend I didn't hear anything. But I have a job to do, and I won't let fear stop me. I'm going to grab my flashlight, walk back into that hall, and see if any of those statues have shifted. I'm not sure what I'll find. My stomach is in knots and my palms are sweaty, but I'll go. If I hear breathing again, I'll turn around fast. If I see footprints, I'll follow them. I need to know if there's someone messing with me or if there's something else in this place. I'm standing now, ready to leave the security room. My breath is quick, and my forehead is damp. I open the door and step into the corridor. The overhead lights flicker for a moment. I tell myself it's just faulty wiring. I force myself to put one foot in front of the other. I glance at the camera feed on my phone app, but it's not loading. The signal is weak here. My nerves feel electric. The steps are louder now, echoing toward me. I swallow hard. I shine my flashlight ahead, and I think I see a shape move behind a pedestal. I can't tell if it's real or my imagination. My heart is slamming in my chest. There's no turning back. I'm here until dawn, and I have to keep going. That's my job, and I can't leave this alone any longer. I can't ignore that sound anymore. Every midnight it cuts through the silence in my bedroom. It sounds like a bell, but I know there's no bell near my apartment or anywhere else around here. Last night I decided to follow it. That's when I found the empty lot and those half-finished walls. They look old, like someone tried to build something there decades ago and gave up. The place felt strange, but the bell kept ringing, and the noise seemed to come from inside those walls. I didn't see a bell or anything that could produce that kind of ringing. Even so, I heard it loud and clear, getting closer with every step. My hands felt clammy. My heart was pounding. I stood there trying to figure out what was happening. There were marks on the walls that looked like symbols or words, but I couldn't read them. I'm a 35-year-old guy. I'm not an expert in old buildings or architecture. I live alone in a small apartment on the edge of town. My nights are usually quiet. I don't have a roommate or anyone else in the apartment. I work at a local hardware store. I handle orders, check inventory, and help customers find what they need. My evenings are uneventful. I watch some TV or browse the internet. Sometimes I cook, sometimes I just order takeout. Lately, though, I've been waking up at midnight because of that bell. At first I thought I was dreaming, then I realized I wasn't. The bell was real enough for me to hear it through closed windows. 3 days ago, I decided to get out of bed and track that sound. I stepped outside in my sweatpants and an old jacket. The street was deserted. Streetlights were on, but they looked dim. The sky was overcast, so there were no stars. I stood there, focusing on the direction of the noise. It was faint, but I could make it out. It came from farther down the street, so I walked in that direction. My heart rate was steady at first, but after a few steps it started picking up. Each ring felt like a small jolt to my chest. I passed familiar houses and a few empty yards. Then I turned the corner and reached a spot I don't usually visit. That's where I found the vacant lot. It's surrounded by a chain-link fence, but part of the fence is missing. I slipped through a gap and walked toward the center. The ground was uneven, with weeds and chunks of concrete. I had to watch my step to avoid tripping. In the middle of the lot, I saw some walls. They formed a rough square, maybe 30 feet on each side. Some sections were knee-high, some reached up to my shoulder. The bricks looked worn. I touched one of them, and it felt damp. There was a slight smell of mildew in the air. I noticed some metal rods sticking out of the top in one corner. They were rusty. I guess this structure was abandoned a long time ago. While I stood there, the bell sounded again. This time it was louder. I spun around. I couldn't see anything that resembled a bell tower or even a wind chime. The bell had a metallic tone, like bronze or iron. It echoed for a few seconds. My palms were sweating and I rubbed them on my jacket. I felt a nervous pressure in my chest. I circled the walls. The weeds reached up to my shins. Every few steps I stumbled over a rock or a broken chunk of concrete. When I got to the northeastern corner of the structure, I saw markings on the bricks. They looked like symbols. I couldn't tell if they were letters or shapes. I crouched down and squinted. Some lines were carved deep, some were shallow. I traced one of them with my finger. It didn't feel like anything I recognized. I tried to read it, but it made no sense. It might have been an old alphabet or some kind of code. There was a small drawing next to the letters. It looked like a circle with a diagonal line. I leaned closer, but the wind picked up and I felt a chill on my neck. The bell rang again, and I jerked my head around. There was no obvious source for the sound. I walked around the walls again. My steps were fast and my breathing got heavier. I kicked a loose stone and heard it clatter against a pile of debris. The bell sounded for the 4th time. I was sure it was coming from somewhere inside the walls, but there was nothing inside them except broken concrete, weeds, and trash. My hands started shaking. The tension in my shoulders was getting worse, and I could feel a dull ache creeping up my neck. I took a few deep breaths and forced myself to calm down. I decided to check the markings more carefully. I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight to see better. The writing continued around the corners. I followed it along the bricks. It seemed to form a series of messages, but I couldn't read them. I stood there for another 10 minutes, trying to make sense of it all. Then I realized I was freezing. My feet were cold, and the damp air was seeping through my jacket. I also realized I was supposed to get up for work in a few hours. I took one last look at the walls and left, promising myself I'd come back the next night. The bell didn't ring again that night, at least not while I was out there. When I got back to my apartment, I closed the door and collapsed on the couch. My heart was still racing. I couldn't sleep well. I woke up tired and stiff. At work, I felt distracted. I kept replaying the sound of that bell in my head. I thought about the weird symbols. I wondered if they were warnings or instructions. I wondered if I should just ignore the whole thing and stay home. But curiosity got the better of me. The second night, I planned better. I wore warmer clothes. I took a small pry bar and a flashlight from the hardware store. I also brought a notebook and a pencil. At midnight, the bell rang again. I jumped out of bed, put on my jacket and headed to the lot. The street was quiet like before. I didn't see any cars or people around. The air felt heavier, and the sky was still cloudy. The ring led me to the same spot inside the broken walls. This time I set my flashlight on a loose brick to keep my hands free. I pried at a few sections of the old mortar, looking for hidden objects. The mortar was crumbly, but I didn't find anything that looked like a bell or any mechanical part. The place was just rotting bricks and rusted rods. I flipped open my notebook and tried to copy some of the symbols. My pencil scraped against the paper. Some of the lines were curved, some had sharp angles. I wrote them down just as I saw them. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but the bell rang again and I felt that same jolt of fear. My mouth went dry and I had to swallow a few times. The sound was loud and clear. I shone my flashlight across the broken walls. Shadows stretched over the rubble. I saw a rat scurry behind a chunk of concrete. My stomach flipped, but I forced myself to keep drawing. After I wrote down as many symbols as I could, I checked the rest of the lot. I walked the perimeter, kicking aside trash and broken glass. The fence rattled in the wind. I stayed for an hour, waiting for some clue. The bell rang 2 more times, always in that same spot. Nothing appeared. I felt like I was stuck in 2 places at once, my real life and some weird echo. The tension in my shoulders got worse with each ring. At around 1 a.m., I left. I felt uneasy all the way back to my apartment. I checked over my shoulder a few times because I had the strong sensation that something was behind me. I heard my own footsteps echoing, and they sounded off, like they didn't match my pace. When I got home, I spread my notes on the coffee table. I tried to match the symbols to any alphabet I knew. I thought about Greek letters, Roman letters, runes, or even random graffiti. None of it matched. The shapes were inconsistent. Some looked almost like letters I knew. Others looked completely foreign. I felt frustrated. The lines seemed to hint at a message, but I couldn't read it. Around 2 a.m., I gave up and went to bed. I fell asleep and dreamed about bricks and bells, but nothing made sense. The next morning, I woke up exhausted. My mind kept drifting at work, and I even knocked over a display of screws because I couldn't focus. After my shift, I went online and searched for historical buildings in the area. I didn't find anything about a construction site in that lot. I also searched for unusual alphabets, but nothing I saw on the internet looked close to what I had. I felt stuck. I thought about going to a local historian or a professor at the community college. Then I realized how ridiculous that might sound. I pictured myself telling them I hear a bell at midnight from a place with no visible bell. They'd ask if I was joking. That third night, I returned to the lot again. I arrived a little before midnight. I walked around with my flashlight. The air felt colder than the night before. There was a slight breeze. It carried a stale odor from the rubble. My nose wrinkled and I felt a faint churn in my stomach. While I waited, I pressed my palm against the bricks in the corner with the inscriptions. My skin felt clammy, and the brick felt rough. The mortar flaked off under my fingertips. I stepped back and checked the rest of the walls again. I noticed a small crack in the corner that I hadn't seen before. It looked deeper than the others. I crouched down and shone my light inside. I couldn't see anything but darkness. At midnight, the bell rang again. My muscles tensed, and I felt a prickle along the back of my neck. I tried to locate the exact spot where the sound was strongest. I moved in a slow circle around the center of the walls, holding my breath. The rings echoed, and my ears started to ring themselves, like I was dealing with feedback. I almost dropped my flashlight because my hand was shaking. I took a few steps toward the northern wall. The sound felt louder there. The next ring was so strong it vibrated my eardrums. I pressed my free hand over my ear. My heart was racing. My legs felt unsteady. I sucked in a breath and moved closer to the wall. The surface looked the same. Worn bricks, some cracks, bits of moss. Then I heard a scraping noise behind me. I spun around. I saw a piece of debris shift near the far corner. I walked over, shining my flashlight on the debris. It was just a slab of concrete, leaning against a chunk of brick. I kicked it lightly and it slid over, revealing more weeds and dirt. I checked underneath but didn't see anything. I heard the bell again, and it sounded sharper, like it was right next to me. I flinched. My pulse hammered in my temples. I stood there for a few seconds, feeling a wave of nausea. I swallowed and steadied myself. Then I looked up at the partial wall next to me. I noticed a set of markings that were clearer than the others. They lined up vertically. I recognized a pattern that repeated in two sections. It reminded me of something urgent, but I couldn't figure out the meaning. I placed my hand on the bricks. They felt cold and slightly damp. I traced the vertical lines. They were uneven, but they formed a shape that could be a warning or some kind of message about timing. I glanced at my phone. It was 12:06. The bell rang again. My head throbbed. I wrote down what I saw as fast as I could. Then I heard another scraping noise. I turned around, shining my flashlight on the ground. I saw a thick clump of weeds moving in the breeze. The sound must have been the wind, but it made me jump anyway. I stayed another hour, but nothing more happened. The bell rang twice more and then stopped. The air felt stale. The night felt oddly heavy. I realized I was drained. I left the lot and went straight home, feeling a dull pain in my calves. My mouth tasted bitter. I could smell the dust on my clothes. I kept thinking about those vertical marks. They seemed to say something about the next midnight. I wasn't sure how, but it felt like the warnings were pointing to the next time the bell would ring. Every time I thought about it, my stomach knotted up. Tonight I'm planning to go back again. I feel tense. My neck muscles are tight and I keep rubbing them. I have a flashlight with extra batteries, a portable recorder, and a small crowbar. I don't know what I expect to find. I just know that I can't ignore it. There's something about that place that feels stuck in time. I'm hearing echoes of something that might not exist anymore. Part of me thinks I should board up my windows and pretend none of this is happening, but I can't do that. My curiosity and my fear are pushing me forward. The idea of leaving this unexplained makes my chest feel tight. I can't let this go. If the inscriptions warn about something coming with the next bell, I want to be there to see it, or at least hear it. I want to know what it is. Maybe I'll regret this decision, but right now I need answers. I'll walk there a bit before midnight. I'll set up my recorder and try to document the sound. I'll look for new inscriptions or any changes in the walls. I'll keep my eyes open for movement in the rubble. If the bell gets closer again, I'll try to stand right where it seems loudest. Maybe I'll discover something hidden. Maybe I'll see a small mechanism or find a hidden cavity in the walls. I don't know. My stomach is turning while I think about it. My hands feel sweaty, but I'm going to do it. And when the bell rings, I'll be ready, or at least I'll try to be. I just hope whatever is coming doesn't catch me off guard. I'm not sure what form it will take, but I have to see this through. I have to know why this is happening and what it means. For now, I'm just a guy with a flashlight and a notepad, waiting for the next midnight to arrive. I still remember the first night I slept in that house on the hill. I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the trees bend outside the window. The wind never stopped. It rattled the shutters and made the walls creak. My legs felt tense and my throat went dry. I thought it was my nerves. The place was new to me, and I assumed I would get used to it. But then, around midnight, I heard something. It wasn't just a gust. It was a faint noise under the wind, like a distorted voice. I froze, listening with my head tilted. My pulse pounded in my ears. That was the moment I realized I wouldn't sleep well that night. I went to the front porch because I thought I should check the noise. The porch light was weak, flickering at odd intervals. The wind felt cold against my face, and my jacket wasn't enough to keep me warm. I stepped out carefully, looking at the ground. Nothing unusual showed up at first, just the grass swaying. Then the wind changed direction. It blew so hard that I had to steady myself against the railing. I listened again, hoping to hear normal sounds, a branch snapping or a loose piece of metal somewhere. Instead, I heard a drawn-out whisper. It was so low that I couldn't pick out words. It sounded more like a hush that lingered. I stared into the darkness, aiming my flashlight at the yard, but I didn't see anything move. My stomach felt tight. I went back inside and locked the door. The next day, I decided to explore the property in daylight. The hill sloped down behind the house, leading to a patch of tall grass and a few scattered trees. Nothing too thick, just some old trunks with twisted branches. As I walked around, the grass crunched under my boots. It was dry, even though it had rained a few days earlier. The wind kept brushing past my ears. It wasn't as intense in the morning, but it kept reminding me of the night before. I found some odd patterns in the grass. They looked like claw marks, but much bigger than what I'd expect from a small animal. The tracks formed curves and lines in several spots. Each set of marks stretched for a few feet, then disappeared. I pressed my hand against one of the impressions. The dirt was slightly loose, as if something had dragged heavy points across it. I felt uneasy. I looked around and didn't see any broken fences or signs of a large creature. I tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was just the wind lifting some roots or something like that. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the strange shapes. That evening, I stood by the window again. The wind picked up around sunset and the temperature dropped. I made some coffee in the kitchen, keeping the lights on this time. My hands shook a bit as I held the mug. I told myself it was just the caffeine. I glanced through the window and noticed how the grass outside seemed to bend in waves. The wind was blowing in bursts that made the trees sway. I kept seeing shadows in the corner of my eye, small, darting shapes that vanished the moment I focused on them. My heart started racing. My mind flashed back to those odd claw marks. I told myself to stay calm. I locked all the windows and doors, then sat down on the couch with my coffee. I heard the wind again, stronger this time. I heard those faint whispers under the roar like multiple low voices. I tried to watch something on TV, but I couldn't pay attention. I decided to walk outside one more time to see if there was a branch scraping against the house or something that would explain the sounds. I grabbed my flashlight and put on a heavier jacket. I stepped onto the porch. My flashlight's beam cut through the night, landing on the grass. I walked down the steps slowly, feeling each board under my boots. The moment I reached the grass, I noticed it felt damp. The wind was colder, and it wrapped around me in quick gusts. I heard faint rustling from the trees. Then I saw something in the light. It was a small, dark shape near the corner of the yard. It moved in a quick, jittery motion. My heart thumped. I pointed the flashlight directly at it. The shape disappeared as if it dissolved into the air. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to spot it again. Nothing moved. I felt a chill run down my spine. I kept the flashlight pointed around the yard, scanning the perimeter. The wind whipped against my body. I heard a low hiss coming from behind me, so I spun around. Again, nothing there. My pulse was racing, and my breathing was shallow. I felt the grass brushing against my boots. I moved back toward the porch. Before I stepped onto the first stair, I caught a glimpse of another dark shape near the tree line. It floated or danced around in the wind. I tried to keep the light on it, but the moment the beam hit that spot, the shape was gone. I held my breath, scanning the area, but everything looked normal again. I climbed the steps and nearly tripped on the last one because my legs were shaking. I locked myself inside, double-checking each window. For the next few nights, the routine continued. The wind picked up after sunset. I heard those faint whispers through the walls. Sometimes I thought they sounded close to actual words, but they never made sense. I tried using earplugs one night, but I could still sense the vibrations through the windows. Each morning I walked around the property and found more of those weird patterns in the grass. They spread across different sections of the yard, always in sets of curved lines or wavy shapes. It wasn't random. There was a pattern, but I couldn't figure it out. I tried taking pictures on my phone. When I looked at them later, They never seemed as clear as in person. The photos showed flattened grass, but the details of the marks were hard to see. One afternoon, I invited a friend over to see if he could help me figure out what was going on. He was a handyman who worked in the area and knew about local wildlife. I told him about the wind and the shapes. He seemed skeptical. We walked around the yard together. He noticed the marks but suggested they might be from shifting soil or maybe deer hooves. I pointed out that the marks were deeper than typical deer tracks, and they had a more scraping look. He shrugged. We went inside and waited for the sun to go down. We sat at my kitchen table, sharing a few beers. The wind started up again. My friend paused his sip and lifted his head. I saw concern on his face. It was the first time he looked genuinely uneasy. He asked if I heard something under the wind. I told him I had been hearing it every night. He set his beer down and suggested we step outside to check it out. I felt a sense of relief, hoping someone else would finally confirm what I was experiencing. We took 2 flashlights and walked to the front yard. The wind hit us like a blast, and my eyes watered. I braced myself and walked forward, scanning the grass. My friend stood by my side, shining his flashlight around. After a minute, he motioned for me to stop. He leaned closer to me and whispered that he saw something move near the trees. We both aimed our lights there. I caught a glimpse of a flickering shape. It moved in short bursts, almost pulsing with the wind. My friend took a step toward it. I wanted to hold him back, but I also wanted to see what it was. We crept closer, each step making my heart pound. Then my friend's light flickered. He cursed under his breath. When we got the beam steady again, the shape was gone. The only thing in front of us was tall grass. He turned to me, and I saw sweat on his forehead, even in the cool wind. He didn't say much. He just stood there, breathing hard. He told me we should go back inside. We did. He left soon after, telling me he had to think about it. He said he wasn't sure what we saw, but it felt wrong. I locked up again, this time feeling my hands tremble as I turned the key. I stood in my living room and listened to the wind. The whispers felt louder that night. My skin prickled and my hair stood on end. It felt like someone was standing behind me. I turned around, shining my flashlight across the walls, but I saw no one. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to those shapes. Each night brought new gusts of wind. The patterns in the grass kept multiplying. One morning, I found marks that stretched all the way to the dirt road leading into town. I drove around checking if neighbors had seen anything. A few folks told me the wind on that hill was legendary. They said they had heard stories of strange noises, but nobody ever proved anything. Most people just shrugged and changed the subject. Back at the house, I felt trapped by the wind. It never gave me peace. Every small sound made me jump. My shoulders stayed stiff and my head felt light from lack of sleep. I began hearing short bursts of clicking in the walls at random times. I would stand in my living room, scanning each corner, but I never found a source. Sometimes the wind would blow against the windows with such force that I expected the glass to break, but it held. That made the inside of the house feel sealed off, like a box under siege. One evening, I decided to set up a small camera on the porch. I wanted to capture any movement in the yard. I placed the camera facing the area where I had seen those shapes. I stayed inside, watching the feed on my laptop. For a long time, there was nothing but swaying grass. The wind pushed some branches around. Then, around midnight, I saw a flicker on the screen. A quick, dark blur crossed the corner of the frame. My stomach flipped. I leaned closer, rewinding the footage. The shape was too fast and small to identify. It looked like it had a form, but the details were unclear. I saw a hint of movement where I thought I could see separate limbs or appendages, but it was gone before I could focus on it. I recorded the footage on my laptop, saving it. I tried to watch it again in slow motion, but it was too blurry. I sat up most of the night, going through that clip frame by frame. Every time I replayed it, my chest felt tight. My hands grew clammy on the keyboard. I almost convinced myself it was just a piece of debris caught in the wind. but my gut told me something else was out there. I went to bed as the sun started to rise, but I didn't really rest. My dreams were filled with the sound of howling gusts and that vague whisper I couldn't place. The next day, I noticed more scratches in the yard. They formed a broad arc near the back fence. The ground looked churned up. I crouched down to examine it. The soil was freshly disturbed with clumps scattered around. It smelled earthy and damp. I touched the deepest part of one mark and felt the groove with my fingertip. It was firm enough that something had to apply pressure to carve that out. My heart raced as I imagined some set of claws scraping over the grass in the middle of the night. I stood up and wiped the dirt off my hands. The evening came with a louder wind than usual. It rattled the tin roof of the tool shed behind the house. I paced around inside, checking every window. By midnight, I was so tense that my muscles ached. I stood by my back door, flashlight in one hand, the other hand on the door handle. My plan was to walk out there one more time, try to get a better look and record anything I saw. I even turned my phone camera on before stepping outside. The wind whipped around me as soon as I opened the door. My jacket flapped against my body. I took a few steps across the yard, scanning the ground. The flashlight beam bounced with each step. My phone recorded nothing but my shaky movements. The wind whistled. I heard a soft scraping sound about 10 feet to my right. I jerked the flashlight that way. In the beam, I glimpsed a dark form twisting in the wind. It looked about knee-high, with a ragged outline. I tried to move closer, but a sudden gust forced me back. By the time I steadied myself, the shape was gone. My breathing was heavy and my hands were slick with sweat. I turned around, ready to head back to the house. Then I heard a hissing sound right behind me. I spun around again, flashlight shaking in my grip. There was no figure there. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. The wind gusted again, almost knocking me off balance. I forced my feet to move and sprinted back to the door. I stumbled inside and slammed it shut, locking it. My chest rose and fell with each breath. I stood there, leaning on the door for a long time, trying to calm down. Every nerve in my body felt raw. I realized I was gripping my flashlight so hard that my knuckles hurt. That night, I sat on the floor by the couch, listening to the wind swirl around the house. The walls groaned under the pressure. I heard those whispers again, more insistent than before. It felt like they were just outside the windows, pushing to get in. I kept the lights on, and my phone in my hand, but I didn't open the door again. I felt an odd certainty that I wasn't alone on that hill. I sensed something ancient and watchful drifting in each gust. My skin tingled with each shift of the wind. I stayed awake until morning, counting the minutes until the sky lightened. I've been here ever since, dealing with the never-ending wind and the shapes it carries. I don't have a clear explanation, and I haven't found evidence that convinces anyone else. But I know what I see at night. I know how my body reacts to those whispers. Whenever I step outside after dark, I see fresh marks in the grass. I see dark shapes flitting around in the corners of my vision. The wind never stops on this hill, and I feel that presence each time it passes. I never expected a mirror to make me question my own eyes, but that's exactly what happened after I inherited that heavy Baroque piece. I remember standing in my living room the day it arrived, staring at the swirling carvings on the wooden frame. I ran my fingers over the detailed patterns and felt the rough texture under my skin. I thought it looked impressive, so I hung it in my hallway. That's where everything changed, and I want to tell you exactly how. My name is Robert. I'm 38. I work as a claims adjuster for an insurance company, and I've lived alone in a 2-bedroom house for the last 5 years. I never had much interest in antiques, but an older cousin passed away and left me this mirror. He had no children, and he always joked that I should inherit his strangest possessions. I didn't think much of it at first. I brought it inside, checked the back to see if it was stable, and noticed the small metal hooks. They looked old and were scratched in spots. The front had a shiny, reflective surface that didn't seem cracked or damaged, so I believed it would be a nice piece to brighten up my hallway. The first week, nothing unusual happened. I walked by it every day on my way to work. Sometimes I glanced at my reflection, but I didn't see anything strange. I occasionally wiped away some dust and admired the carvings. I could see leaf shapes and swirling lines. The wood was dark and had a glossy finish. Whenever the sun hit it in the morning, I saw little sparkles in the varnish like flecks of gold mixed into the paint. I tightened the screws on the hooks to make sure it was secure, and then continued my daily routine. On the 8th day, something felt off. I remember coming home after a long day. My shirt was damp with sweat because my car's air conditioning had failed. I dropped my keys on the small table near the front door. The hallway was dim, but I could see the mirror's outline. I glanced at my reflection and felt my stomach clench. I saw my face, but my reflection's left eye seemed to move a fraction of a second slower than my actual left eye. I blinked a few times, thinking I was just tired. I leaned in, but then it looked normal again. I pressed my palm against my forehead. I thought I was dehydrated. I walked away and tried to ignore it. A few nights later, I had trouble sleeping. I paced around the living room, checking emails, flipping through channels on the TV, and feeling restless. At around 1 in the morning, I decided to get a glass of water. My hallway light was off, so everything was dark. When I passed by the mirror, I stopped. I heard a faint tapping noise. It sounded like it came from the other side of the mirror. I turned on the hallway light and stared at the glass. I didn't see any cracks. I tapped the surface with my knuckle. The sound echoed a bit, but it didn't match the tapping I thought I heard. I leaned in closer. My reflection looked normal at first. Then, my reflection's lips twitched, even though I wasn't making any expression. I felt a chill crawl up my arms. I jerked backward. My back bumped the hallway wall. I stood there for a few seconds, feeling a tight knot in my chest. I tried to calm down by telling myself it was late and I was tired. I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. I turned off the light and went into the kitchen for water. I drank quickly and headed to bed. My pulse took a while to settle, and I tossed and turned until I finally fell asleep. The next morning, I got up and tried to approach the mirror in a logical way. I walked right up to it in broad daylight. I looked at my reflection for a good minute. I moved my arms. I tilted my head. I blinked my eyes. Everything matched. I saw nothing strange. I decided I would call a friend later that day to talk about it, but the day got away from me. Work was busy, and I ended up forgetting. Around 3 days later, I decided to clean my house. The mirror was dusty again, so I grabbed a rag and some glass cleaner. As soon as I started wiping, I noticed an odd scent. It reminded me of old books or a damp basement. I checked behind the frame, and I found some patches of old dust and maybe some cobwebs, but nothing else. Still, the smell lingered. It made me wrinkle my nose. I wiped the mirror's surface and I felt a slight vibration. It was subtle, like a faint hum. I set down the rag and listened. I couldn't tell where the noise was coming from, but it stopped as soon as I stepped back. I moved forward again. No more vibration. I finished cleaning and decided to leave it at that. I felt uneasy for the rest of the day. I kept glancing at the hallway whenever I passed by, half expecting to see something. That evening, I ordered takeout and sat in the living room to watch a show. I felt a tightness in my shoulders, so I tried to relax by stretching. The house was quiet, except for the TV. After a while, I paused the show to grab a soda. On my way to the kitchen, I saw a faint glow coming from the hallway. It took me a few seconds to realize it was a small reflection from the streetlight outside. It was bouncing off the mirror's surface at an odd angle. I walked closer to see if maybe a neighbor's car headlights were pointed at my house. I didn't see any car out there. I just saw the streetlight. Its glow seemed to be hitting the mirror and making the hallway look strange. The shadows on the walls looked darker than usual. I stepped in front of the mirror and my stomach twisted again. I felt like I was standing in a cold breeze. The hair on my arms stood up. My reflection stared back. but I noticed something behind me in the glass. It looked like a figure, but there was nothing behind me in the hallway. I turned around, and I saw only empty space. I looked back at the mirror, and the figure was still there, standing behind my reflection. It looked like a man in old-fashioned clothes. His posture was stiff, and his eyes looked focused on my reflection's face. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Then the figure faded. It disappeared, but I still felt cold. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. I rushed away from the hallway and stood in the living room, breathing fast. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what to do. I considered calling a friend, but I felt stupid explaining I saw a strange figure in my mirror. So I just stood there until my breathing slowed down. I started avoiding the hallway at night. I used the side door to leave for work. I avoided turning on the hall light. I did anything I could to pretend that mirror wasn't there, but that's not a practical way to live. After a week of this, I told myself I was being paranoid. I decided to stand in front of the mirror again and face whatever I thought I saw. One night, around midnight, I crept to the hallway, turned on the light, and stared at the glass. My reflection looked normal for several seconds. I forced myself to move my arms up and down, to wave at the mirror. Everything matched. I felt silly. I leaned in and looked into my own eyes. I felt relief building, and I started to believe it had all been in my head. Then, out of nowhere, the reflection's head turned slightly to the left. I wasn't moving my head at all. My breathing stopped. The reflection's eyes blinked, and its right hand twitched. I backed up until my shoulders hit the opposite wall. I could see my reflection's mouth move, but no words came out. My tongue felt dry. My legs shook. I slid along the wall, keeping my eyes on the glass, and turned off the light. As soon as the hallway went dark, I saw faint shapes moving on the mirror's surface. I heard a quiet rustling, almost like footsteps on carpet, but I couldn't tell if it was coming from the mirror or from my house. My heart raced. I hurried to my bedroom and closed the door. I locked it. I sat on my bed, trying to slow my breathing. My forehead was damp with sweat, and my throat was tight. I listened for any sounds from the hallway, but everything was quiet after a minute or two. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I felt exhaustion in my bones. My back ached from lying in one position all night, and my eyes burned. I stayed home from work. I spent half the day in the kitchen drinking coffee and pacing. By noon, I decided to check on the mirror again, but in daylight this time. I held my phone in my hand, ready to record a video. I approached the hallway. The sunlight was coming in from the window at the end of the corridor. I saw dust particles floating in the air. The mirror looked normal. I stood in front of it and turned on the camera. I recorded myself talking. I waved. I moved side to side. It all looked normal. I stopped recording and played it back. It matched perfectly. No delay in movement, no strange figures. I let out a sigh and felt some relief, even though deep down I still felt uneasy. That night I woke up to a scratching noise. It was soft but constant, like someone lightly dragging a fingernail across a surface. I realized it was coming from the hallway. My pulse quickened. I got out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and opened my bedroom door. The hallway was dark. I tiptoed toward the mirror. The scratching grew louder. I aimed the flashlight at the glass. I could see faint lines across the reflection. It was like something was scraping from the other side. My heart pounded. My hand trembled, and I almost dropped the flashlight. Then I heard a whisper, but I couldn't make out any words. It sounded like a breathy voice. My chest felt tight, and my mouth went dry. I couldn't move for a moment. The scratching stopped, and the mirror went silent. I stared at it for a long time, holding my breath. Then I turned and went back to my bedroom, closing the door quietly. The next morning, I decided to call a local antiques dealer. His name was Frank. I told him I had a Baroque mirror I'd inherited, and I wanted to know if he could come take a look. I didn't mention anything strange. I just said I was curious about its value. Frank arrived that afternoon. He was in his late 50s, wearing a dusty jacket and holding a small flashlight. He walked up to the mirror and examined the carvings. He noted the craftsmanship. He said it was likely from the 18th century, maybe earlier. He asked if I felt any draft near it or if I noticed any warping in the frame, since older pieces sometimes had hidden compartments. I shook my head. He tapped the frame a few times, then tapped the glass. He said the mirror itself might have been replaced at some point because the backing seemed different from the frame's era. He gave me his business card and said it was a unique piece, but it would require more research to determine a value. I thanked him, and he left. The entire time he was there, nothing odd happened. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. I wanted proof that I wasn't imagining everything. That night, I mustered the courage to stand in front of the mirror again, hoping to spot something while I recorded it. I turned on every light in the hallway. I stood there with my phone's camera rolling. My reflection stayed in sync for several minutes. I ended the recording, then started another. Still nothing happened. I felt my anxiety slow down. I decided to shut off the hallway lights to see if the dark triggered anything. With the lights off, the hallway felt colder. I shone my phone's flashlight at the glass. The beam illuminated my reflection. My face looked pale. My eyes had dark circles. I noticed movement in the corner of the mirror, so I pointed the light there. I saw the outline of a woman's face, but only for a second. She wore a hood or a shawl around her head. Her eyes appeared wide and her mouth was open. She vanished before I could react. My chest tightened and I felt a sudden wave of nausea. I scrambled away from the mirror, nearly dropping my phone. I didn't even think to check if the camera caught anything. From that moment on, I was sure there was something trapped in that mirror. Actually, it felt more like many people were trapped. Every time I tried to walk past, I sensed their eyes on me. I heard their faint breaths. Sometimes I caught glimpses of them. I saw faces that looked old and worn, like they were from a different time. They never spoke words, but I heard soft whispers. My body's reaction was always the same. I felt my skin crawl, and my breath got shallow. My head throbbed from the tension. I started sleeping in the living room because I couldn't stand being so close to the hallway. I still have the mirror. I considered taking it outside or breaking it, but I got scared of what might happen if I did. Instead, I covered it with a thick bedsheet. I pinned the sheet in place. Now, when I walk by, I see the outline of the frame under the fabric, and I feel a weak urge from inside, like the mirror wants me to remove the covering. I resist that urge. The hallway is quieter now, but sometimes I catch a muffled voice from beneath the sheet. It's faint, and it fades if I listen too closely. I don't know how long I can keep it covered. I feel the pressure every time I pass by. My hands get sweaty and my heart beats faster when I stand near it. I have dreams where the sheet slips off and the mirror's surface glows in the darkness. I don't know how this ends. I haven't told many people, and I'm not interested in scaring myself more by doing internet searches. I keep the mirror because I'm afraid to let it loose on someone else. But I can't keep living like this. If I had the courage, I'd smash it. But I worry about what might come next. So that's my story. That's what happened after I inherited that mirror. All I can do now is avoid it as much as possible, try to get through each day, and hope the reflection on the other side never breaks free. I noticed the strangeness on a Tuesday morning. It was my usual shift at the library, and I was walking through the far stacks with a cart full of old journals. Everything felt ordinary at first, but then I looked at the floor and saw nothing under me. I bent down and stared at the linoleum tiles. The overhead lights were strong, yet I had no shadow. I stood up and looked around. The shelves didn't cast shadows either, and the light on the books looked dull. I felt a chill in my neck. I walked out of that aisle quickly and went back to the circulation desk to check the logs for the day. I didn't want to sound weird to my co-workers, so I kept quiet. But I kept thinking about it, and later that day I went back and checked the same spot. I found the same effect. No shadows. My body felt lighter, though I didn't feel sick or dizzy. I felt like my breath left me faster. I heard a slight hum from the overhead lights, but it was a weaker sound than usual. My heart pounded and my hands got clammy. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds and then I ran out of the aisle again. I tried to act normal for the rest of the day. I helped patrons find references, shelved returns, and answered phone calls. But my mind kept replaying the moment I saw no shadow under my feet. The library I work at is old. The corridors stretch out in many directions, and we have entire wings with old manuscripts, maps, and dusty reference books. Some sections barely receive visitors. Over the years, I've heard stories about strange corners of the building, books moving on their own, lights flickering, or echoes in the basement. I used to ignore all that. I enjoy my job, and I'm used to quiet. I like the smell of old pages. But the no-shadow aisle was different. It felt real and impossible to ignore. The next morning, I decided to investigate. After clocking in, I made sure nobody needed me at the front. Then I walked down the main corridor toward the restricted area where we keep ancient manuscripts. I paused at the entrance to that aisle. The overhead lights buzzed slightly, and I noticed dust floating in the air. My chest felt tight. I stepped forward. I kept my eyes on the floor, trying to see if my shadow would appear. It didn't. I moved my hands around, lifted them up toward the shelves, and saw nothing. The floor looked flat and bright under me. The wooden shelves showed no dark outlines behind them. It was like the light was uniform and strange. I swallowed hard. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. I wanted to see if there was any label or sign in that area. I walked farther in, checking the spines of the books. I spotted a small metal plaque on one of the shelves. It was mostly tarnished, but I could make out a few letters. I ran my finger across it. It felt rough. The shelf was covered in a layer of dust. I pulled a random volume out. It was bound in dark leather, worn along the edges with a faint title I could barely read. I opened it carefully. The pages were yellow, and the text inside was handwritten in a language I didn't recognize. The letters were sharp, but I couldn't match them to anything I'd seen before. I felt a pressure build up behind my eyes, like I was straining to read, even though I knew I couldn't understand it. My stomach felt queasy. I placed the book back. My arms felt weaker, and there was a slight trembling in my fingers. I tried to get a grip on myself. I thought maybe the lighting was faulty in this section, or maybe I'd missed an official notice about renovations, but I had never heard a single word about that. The library rarely updates anything in the old manuscripts room. I turned to leave, but I caught a faint sound. It reminded me of my name, but it was too soft to be sure. I froze. My pulse sped up. I looked around, scanning every aisle. I saw no one. The hum from the lights seemed a bit louder. I listened for a few more seconds, but the sound didn't repeat. I forced myself to walk away. My back felt tense, and I could sense every step echoing in the corridor. When I got to the main area, I saw a coworker. She waved and asked if I'd seen a set of archival boxes. I said no. My voice came out shaky, so I cleared my throat and tried to smile. I didn't mention anything about the aisle. Instead, I went to the break room and drank some water. I tried to slow my breathing. My heart was still thudding, and my shirt felt damp under my armpits. For the next few days, I avoided that section. I didn't feel brave enough to step back in there. But I kept thinking about it, especially at night. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, recalling how my shadow disappeared and how I felt weightless. The memory gave me goosebumps. Part of me wanted to pretend it never happened, but another part wanted answers. That part was stronger, so eventually, I gave in. After my shift one evening, I grabbed a flashlight and walked over to that aisle. The library was almost empty at that hour. The overhead light stayed on until closing time, but everything felt quieter. I reached the spot and switched off the flashlight to see what it would do. Still no shadow, even though the lights above me were shining down. I noticed the dust motes again, but they looked smaller. My stomach felt tight, and I tasted acid in my throat. I lifted a hand in front of me. The shape of my hand should have appeared on the floor, but it didn't. The floor stayed bright, with a slight sheen. My palms began to sweat more. I pulled another old book from the shelf, something with a thick spine. I flipped through the pages. The words looked like they were from different scripts. Some lines were bold and some faint. My eyes watered as I tried to focus. I thought I heard footsteps behind me, so I turned around fast. Nobody was there. My breath came in short bursts. I decided to check a smaller door at the end of the aisle. It's a wooden door that leads to a storage closet. I thought maybe I'd find a fuse box or something that might explain the lighting. The door was locked. I felt the doorknob. It was cold. I knelt down and peered through the keyhole. I saw darkness, nothing else. I stood up and ran my hand across the door's surface, hoping I'd find some sort of label or number. I felt nothing. The wood felt rough and unfinished. I heard that whisper again. It made me jerk my head around. The sound was behind me, near the shelves. It was faint, but I'm sure it was my name. I froze. My mouth went dry. I stepped back slowly. The door felt solid against my fingertips. My legs twitched, and I felt an urge to run, but I forced myself to stay a bit longer. I wanted to see if I could catch any sign of another person in that aisle. I walked up and down it, scanning the corners. The lights overhead looked ordinary, but the space on the floor and shelves had that same brightness without any shadows. My steps sounded muffled. I wiped sweat from my forehead. Then I heard a crack from behind one of the shelves. It was a sudden noise, like a board shifting. I pointed my flashlight into the gap, but I saw only the dusty edge of the shelf and a few scattered pages on the floor. I didn't see a single person. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I turned off the flashlight again to test the darkness. The area was still lit by the overhead bulbs, but the light felt weaker than before. My arms felt lighter, like they were losing weight. I inhaled and exhaled, trying to calm down. My knees felt unstable. I stepped back into the main corridor and tried to catch my breath. My shoes squeaked on the tile. I looked at my hands under the normal hallway lighting. My hands looked pale, but at least I could see my shadow again on the wall. That gave me a tiny sense of relief. I headed home soon after. Over the next week, I spent time reading about older archives. I checked the library's internal system for any notes on that aisle. I found references to ancient manuscripts donated by some private collector decades ago. There was mention of unusual conditions for storage, but no specifics. I found no record of any maintenance issues or lighting experiments. I asked some older colleagues if they'd noticed anything odd near the restricted section, but they either said no or changed the subject. One coworker gave me a confused look and said she'd only heard rumors about some weird texts that rarely got touched. I couldn't stay away, though. My curiosity kept pushing me back. Each time I'd go a bit deeper into those old shelves. I'd open more volumes and flip through the pages. I noticed the writing shifted from language to language, but I couldn't read a single word. Sometimes I'd feel a wave of dizziness that made me lean on the shelf for balance. Sometimes I'd catch a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye, but I'd turn and see nothing. The silence in that aisle felt different. It felt heavier, yet also made me feel lighter, like the air was thinner. I'd breathe faster without trying to. My mouth would go dry, and I'd rub my hands on my pants to wipe off sweat. At one point, I stayed too long. It was close to closing time, and the other staff were at the front wrapping up. I wanted to see if I'd finally catch a glimpse of something that explained the phenomenon. I pulled a large manuscript off the shelf and rested it on a wooden table near the far wall. The table didn't cast a shadow, and neither did I. The light above hummed softly. I flipped through the pages. My hands were shaking, and the paper felt fragile. The text on these pages was darker than in the other books. It looked freshly inked, though it was obviously old. While I was leaning over the table, I felt a coldness spread through my chest. My arms trembled, and my vision blurred for a moment. I set my hand on my chest and tried to steady my breathing. My name reached my ears again, clearer this time. I whipped around. Nothing was there. My voice came out in a whisper, and I said, "Who's here?" No answer. The overhead light flickered once. My stomach dropped. I closed the manuscript and placed it back on the shelf. My left foot felt numb, like pins and needles. I took a few steps toward the aisle exit and paused. It felt like my body was floating inside my clothes, and I had a slight ringing in my ears. I stood still, forcing myself to remain calm. My heart raced. Sweat trickled down my temple. I took one step after another, focusing on the exit. Each step felt unsteady, like I was on a swaying floor. The overhead lights made the corridor look long and dim. When I reached the brighter hall, I looked down and saw my shadow again. That relief washed over me, but my hands still shook. I clocked out and left. I didn't talk to anyone about it. A few nights later, I couldn't sleep. My body felt restless, and my mind kept replaying the events. Around midnight, I got up from bed, drank some water, and decided I needed a plan. I wanted to see if there was some physical explanation, maybe something about the bulbs in that area or the arrangement of the shelves. I decided that the next day I'd bring a camera and try to record the phenomenon. The next morning I arrived an hour before my shift, carrying a small digital camera. I hurried to the aisle. The place was silent except for the buzzing lights. I hit record and moved around, showing the floor, my feet, the shelves, and everything else. On the camera's screen, I saw only bright light. There was no shadow. My face looked washed out, and my body seemed blurry around the edges. I felt my heart skip a beat. I kept filming. My breathing turned shallow. I kept glancing around for any sign of movement. After a minute, I hit pause and reviewed the footage. My chest tightened when I realized the recording cut out at around 15 seconds. The camera shut itself off, even though the battery was full. I tried again. Same problem. 15 seconds in, it stopped. The battery icon started flashing red. I cursed under my breath and smacked the side of the camera. It didn't help. The lens retracted. I shoved the camera in my pocket, feeling frustrated and scared. I could feel sweat under my collar. I went to the table with the manuscripts and opened one that I'd skimmed before. My arms felt shaky, but I forced myself to look at the text. The letters on the page looked bolder than they did last time. I turned one page at a time, hearing the paper crinkle. I was tense, waiting for another whisper. My shoulders ached from holding them rigid. Then I heard a rustling sound near the floor. I looked down. A bit of dust was swirling around my ankles, though I didn't feel a draft. My heart hammered. I realized I was in too deep. My head started to throb. I closed the manuscript, placed it back on the shelf, and backed away. As I left the aisle, I felt the air get heavier. My footsteps sounded loud. I heard a faint pop in my ear, like pressure equalizing. The second I reached the brighter corridor, I felt more solid. My shadow was back. My arms tingled. My phone rang in my pocket. I jolted, pulling it out. It was a coworker asking where I was. My shift was starting, and I was late to the front desk. I mumbled a quick apology and hurried over. For the rest of that day, I felt shaky. I checked in books and greeted patrons, but my mind stayed locked on that aisle. By the time my shift ended, I felt drained. I went home, took a shower, and tried to sleep. My sleep was broken by nightmares that left me covered in sweat. I woke up in the dark, gasping for air. I couldn't shut off the images of that dust swirling around my feet. My chest felt sore, like I'd been holding my breath for too long. The next afternoon, I decided to talk to one of the senior librarians. I caught him in the office near the administrative wing. I mentioned I'd seen something odd in the old manuscripts area. He frowned and asked me what exactly. I tried to explain the lack of shadows, the strange light, and the feeling of lightness. He stared at me with suspicion. He asked if I'd been sick or under stress. I shook my head. Then he said he didn't want me messing around in areas that aren't part of my normal duties. He told me to stick to the routine tasks. His tone made me think he knew more than he was saying, but I didn't press the issue. That evening, I returned to the aisle one last time. I felt compelled to see if I'd missed anything obvious. My legs felt wobbly as I walked under those lights. The air felt thin again, and I sensed a weakness in my muscles. I glanced at the shelves. The manuscript stood there silent and heavy. The wooden table loomed at the end of the aisle, still not casting a shadow. I gulped. Then I heard the whisper again, right by my ear. My scalp tingled. My body jerked, and I dropped the flashlight I was carrying. It hit the floor with a dull clack and spun around before stopping. The whisper said my name in a longer, drawn-out way. It sounded tired, but still urgent. My heart thundered. My mouth went dry. I bent down to grab the flashlight. My hand trembled, and I could barely hold it. I forced myself to look around, scanning the area. Nothing stood there, yet the whisper seemed so close. My lungs felt tight. My breathing sped up. I could hear my pulse whooshing in my ears. I reached out, touched the nearest shelf, and felt the dust and rough wood. My name came again, quieter, fading into the background hum. I couldn't stay any longer. I turned and walked out, my steps echoing in the corridor. My chest ached and my throat felt scratchy. I didn't look back. I felt a tingling in my skin all the way to the main doors. After I clocked out and left the building, I noticed the colors outside seemed brighter than usual. The sunlight felt warm on my skin. I took long, steady breaths. I still work at the library. I keep my distance from that aisle, and so far, nobody has forced me to go there. I shelve books and help patrons in the safer parts of the building, but sometimes I catch a glimpse of the corridor that leads to those old manuscripts. My stomach twists, and I remember the weightless feeling in the silent shelves. I don't know what's in those books or why the shadows vanish there. I still hear my name whispered in my dreams once in a while. When that happens, I wake up covered in sweat, and my legs feel sore like I've run a mile. I tell myself I won't go back, but I don't know if I believe that. That place keeps pulling at my mind, and I don't have answers. So I go about my day, hoping I can ignore it. But I don't think it's finished with me. I feel a tension in my chest when I pass that corridor, and I sense the air shift around me like something waits there without making a sound. For now, that's all I can say. I try to do my job and avoid that section, but I know it's there, and I know it won't stop. I got this job a few weeks ago. The factory looked like a relic even on the outside, with rust staining the walls and a corrugated metal roof that creaked whenever a breeze passed through. The first time I stepped inside, the air smelled like oil and stale metal shavings. I remember thinking I'd do my time, save some money, and move on. I never expected the place to grip me the way it did. I never expected to feel afraid just being there after dark. Tonight I'm standing outside the staircase that leads down to the basement. My supervisor told me to check the old equipment stored down there and make sure none of it posed a fire hazard. It's a routine task, but I feel uneasy. The corridors upstairs are dim and the overhead lights flicker sometimes. When I look over my shoulder, I see rows of silent machinery and hear the faint buzz of fluorescent lamps. It's quiet enough that I can pick up my own breathing. My palms feel damp against my flashlight. I flick it on and off a couple of times to test it, then start descending the stairs. I can feel the temperature drop as I go down. The basement door is made of thick steel, and when I open it, it groans like it hasn't moved in years. The smell inside is heavier. It's not just dust, it's a strange mix of damp concrete, old grease, and something else I can't identify. I swallow hard and step in. I shine the flashlight around, and the beam reveals a corridor full of pipes along the ceiling. Some valves are rusted in place. The walls are a dull gray, patched with signs of water damage. The floor is uneven, and I can see scraps of metal and broken crates shoved against the corners. I take a few steps, and the door behind me slams shut with a force that makes me jump. My heart thumps in my chest. I turn back, but the door seems perfectly still now. I twist the knob to see if it locked, but it opens easily. My breath feels tight, so I inhale slowly. I try to shake off the nerves and remind myself I'm here to do a simple job. I walk forward, stepping over some tangled wires on the floor. My flashlight flickers a bit. I tap it. It stabilizes, and I keep moving. The corridor leads into a larger area filled with idle machines. A couple of them look like old presses. There are also lathes covered by dirty tarps. I hear a dripping noise, so I shine my light around, but I can't pinpoint where it's coming from. It echoes, bouncing off the metal surfaces. I reach the first press machine. It's about as tall as I am, with a big metal frame and a lever on the side. The paint is chipped and there's a thick layer of dust everywhere. My instructions are to check for any loose parts or signs of damage that could cause a hazard. I set down my flashlight for a second and try to move the press handle. It doesn't budge. I notice some old grease on the hinges, but everything seems stuck in place. While I'm crouched there, I hear something that sounds like footsteps behind me. I freeze, muscles tensed. I swivel my head around and see nothing, just the faint glow of my flashlight on the nearest machine. I straighten up slowly. The air feels colder. I pick up the flashlight, shining it in every direction. I don't see anyone. I wait a moment, listening. There's only a dripping sound and the faint hum of the building's distant power. I convince myself it's just the old metal contracting or some pipe settling. I decide to move on. The next area is deeper into the basement. The corridor narrows, and I have to be careful where I step. There are twisted chunks of metal lying around, and I almost cut my hand when I brush against a jagged edge. I mutter a curse under my breath and keep going, stepping around debris. My flashlight flickers again, more urgently this time. I tap it harder and it goes out entirely for a few seconds. That's when the darkness hits me. It's complete. No light from outside, no glow from above. I can't see my hand in front of my face. My throat tightens and my fingertips start to tingle. I press the switch on the flashlight again and again until finally, the beam returns in a weak, sputtering glow. I feel relief wash over me, but my heart is still pounding. I walk into a wide space that looks like a storage area. There are shelves filled with old gear and broken tools. I see coils of wire, rusted saw blades, and a few metal boxes. Everything is covered in dust. The overhead lights don't work down here, or maybe they never have. My flashlight is the only source of light, and it casts long shadows on the walls. Every step I take sounds loud, and I keep expecting to see someone or something step out from behind a corner. But there's no movement, at least not in direct view. As I pass by a row of shelves, I catch a glimpse of a figure in my peripheral vision. It's a shape that seems bent or twisted. My heart almost jumps out of my chest. I turn the flashlight toward it, but I see nothing there. There's just a metal support beam. My breathing is erratic. I try to calm myself, but my hands are shaking. I keep looking around, trying to see if there's anyone else in the room. It feels like something is off. My instincts are screaming at me to leave, but I also don't want to report back with incomplete work. The next part of the basement is a side room filled with old electrical panels and circuit breakers. I walk in cautiously. The floor is littered with broken glass from overhead bulbs. I step carefully, not wanting to crunch too loudly. A panel on the wall has a label that's too faded to read. I open it just to check if anything is obviously damaged, but it's mostly empty fuses and disconnected wires. The flashlight flickers again, and for half a second, I'm plunged into darkness. When it comes back on, I think I see a figure near the door, but again, it vanishes before I can focus on it. I feel a chill across my shoulders. It's like cold air brushed against my back. I whip around, shining the light. Nothing there. No vents, no open windows. I'm starting to sweat even though it's cold. My shirt is sticking to my back and my neck feels hot. I try to wipe my forehead with my sleeve. I decide to head toward the stairs and maybe take a break. I've done enough of an inspection. My supervisor can complain if he wants, but this is insane. I make my way back through the corridor, tripping on some loose pieces of metal. My flashlight flickers again, and the darkness swallows me for a moment. I realize how quiet it is. Even my footsteps sound muffled, like the walls are soaking up the sound. When I reach the bottom of the stairwell, I feel a wave of relief. I see the concrete steps leading up, and I hear a low hum from the floor above. I climb a few steps, shining the beam ahead of me. The metal railing is cold against my hand. Suddenly, I feel something on my shoulder like a hand grabbing me. It's freezing, and it sends a jolt of panic through my body. I twist around fast, aiming the flashlight, but there's only empty space. The sensation lingers for a moment, making the hair on my arms stand on end. I rush up the rest of the stairs without looking back. By the time I'm at the door, my heart is pounding. I grab the knob, yank it open, and step into the corridor that leads to the main factory floor. I'm breathing heavily. My throat is dry. I walk toward the break room, trying to compose myself, but my mind is racing. Did I imagine that touch? It felt so real, like actual fingers pressing into my shoulder. In the break room, I sit down on a metal chair. The fluorescent light flickers overhead and the fridge hums in the corner. My co-worker Glenn is nowhere to be seen, and the place feels deserted. Maybe everyone else left for the night. I lean forward, resting my elbows on my knees, and run a hand through my hair. I consider just leaving, but the thought of facing the supervisor in the morning without finishing the job nags at me. I know he'll ask if everything's inspected and safe. After a few minutes, I decide I can't walk away yet. I finish the water bottle I had in my bag, then head back out to the corridor. The overhead lights are even dimmer now. The building's old electrical system probably can't handle staying lit for so long at night. I move slowly, trying to stay calm. The factory floor is a maze of silent machinery. Lathes, presses, cutters, conveyor belts that haven't run in years. Everything looks frozen in place, like the workers just vanished one day and left everything behind. I notice a second staircase leading down to another part of the basement. The supervisor didn't mention it, but it's there beyond a stack of crates. I hesitate. Part of me wants to ignore it, but I know I'll wonder about it if I don't check. I walk over to the crates, push them aside, and shine my flashlight down the steps. It's pitch black. The air coming out of there feels colder than anywhere else. I take a moment to gather myself, then descend. The steps creak under my weight, and a layer of dust swirls around my feet. It's obvious nobody's been down here in a long time. I see old machine parts piled in corners, some of them partly disassembled. The corridor extends farther than the first basement area. My flashlight struggles to pierce the darkness, and the beam looks weaker than before. I grip it tighter, worried it might go out. My footsteps echo, and I hear faint dripping again. It's steady, like a slow leak. I try to follow the sound, thinking maybe there's a broken pipe. I pass old metal cabinets with their doors hanging open, cables coiled on the floor, and toolboxes scattered around. Some corners are filled with collapsed wooden crates, and I see a few nails protruding from the broken planks. Everything feels abandoned and forgotten, like someone sealed this part of the factory long ago. Then I hear footsteps behind me. They're heavier than before, more deliberate, like someone is walking at the same pace as I am. I stop, and they stop. My pulse is racing so fast I feel it in my ears. I turn around, shining the flashlight. The corridor is empty. There's only the faint reflection of the light on the metal scraps. I breathe fast, trying to steady myself, but the feeling of being followed won't go away. I keep moving. My mind is telling me to hurry up and get this over with. I just want to take a quick look around and go back up. As I head deeper in, the corridor opens into a wide storage room. Large machines are pushed against the walls, some of them missing parts. I see a stack of gears on a shelf and a few metal rods lying on the floor. My flashlight flickers yet again, and I brace myself. It goes out for several seconds. In the pitch black, I stand still, my heart hammering. I feel something brush past my arm. It's like a cool breeze, but more concentrated, as if a figure just slipped by me. When the flashlight comes back, I whip it around, scanning every inch of the room. I catch a glimpse of a dark silhouette near a machine on the far side. Its limbs look twisted at odd angles. It's just there for an instant, and then it slips out of sight behind the machine. I want to shout, but my voice catches in my throat. My entire body feels paralyzed. I force myself to move. My hands are shaking so badly I can hardly keep the flashlight steady. I stumble around a large piece of equipment, shining the light to see where that shape went. There's no one there. I see a wrench on the ground, partly covered in dust. There's a torn piece of cloth snagged on a metal edge, fluttering slightly. I have no idea who or what I'm dealing with, but I'm certain now there's something down here. At this point, I just want to leave. I back away, keeping my flashlight aimed toward the area where I saw the figure. I keep glancing behind me, not sure which direction is safer. My breath comes in short gasps. My thighs feel weak, and my head is pounding. I make my way to the exit as fast as I can without breaking into a run. The corridor stretches out, and the only sound I hear is my own footsteps, until I reach the stairs. That's when I hear a scraping noise behind me, like metal dragging on concrete. I spin around, but I see only darkness. The flashlight beam lands on a row of crates and a rusted cylinder. Everything is still. I climb the stairs, feeling panic push me onward. I'm breathing through my mouth, trying not to lose it completely. Each step feels like it takes forever. When I finally reach the top, I fling the door open. The hallway is silent, and the factory floor is still. I head straight to the main stairwell that leads to the exit. My footsteps echo too loudly, and I keep looking back over my shoulder. I'm sweating again, and my hands are slick on the flashlight. I climb the stairs to the factory's main entrance. The big steel doors at the front are locked at night, but I have a key. I fumble with it, dropping it once. My fingers aren't working right. I pick it up, slide it in the lock, and push the door open. The cool night air hits me. I stand there for a moment, breathing it in. My heart is still pounding, and I feel lightheaded. I turn around to look back into the factory. The lights inside are flickering. For a split second, I swear I see a movement in the corridor. Then it's gone. Even though I'm outside, I can't shake the feeling of that freezing hand on my shoulder, that grip that silently asked me to stay. I lock the door, walk across the empty parking lot, and reach my car. I get in, turn the engine on, and sit there, my hands on the wheel. My breath is uneven, and my shirt is damp with sweat. I look up at the factory windows. The place is dark except for a few weak lights near the roof. It looks normal from here, but I know it's not. Something inside that building shifts in the darkness. I don't call the supervisor right away. I just drive, focusing on the road, trying to calm down. My thoughts circle around everything I saw and heard. Footsteps in empty corridors, that silhouette, and the unmistakable sensation of a cold hand on my shoulder. I can still feel it, like an imprint. Even with the heater on in the car, I'm shivering. I keep glancing at my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something in the back seat. When I finally get home, I park, sit there a moment, and realize my entire body is trembling. My shoulders ache and my legs feel weak. I step out of the car, look around the quiet street, and head inside. I lock my door, turn on the lights, and throw my jacket on a chair. My reflection in the hallway mirror shows me pale and wide-eyed, like I've seen something I shouldn't have. I don't know how I'm going to explain this to my supervisor. I don't have a neat checklist of findings. Everything down there is old, broken, and probably needs disposal, but that's not the real story. The real story is what I felt every second in that basement. The stares I sensed, the shapes I saw, the steps I heard, and that freezing touch whenever I tried to leave. I have no idea what's going on in that basement. I just know I'm not going back there alone after dark. If someone asks me to do it again, I'm going to insist on backup or flat-out refuse. No job is worth feeling like you're being hunted by something you can't see. That's it. That's what happened. I can't dress it up, and I won't try to make it sound less frightening than it was. It was the most unsettling experience I've ever had. The factory is old and creaky, yes, but there's something else in the basement, something that doesn't want to let go. Every time I think about those steps behind me, that shape in the dark, I feel a shiver crawl up my spine. And every time I remember climbing those stairs, I can almost feel that hand again, pressing down on my shoulder, telling me to stay, not letting me leave in peace. I noticed the envelope on my doorstep the moment I got home from work. It was plain and white. with no return address and no markings. My first reaction was confusion. I wondered if someone had dropped it by mistake. I picked it up and felt a slight shiver in my arms. The paper seemed cold, more than normal mail. I went inside, locked my door, and sat down on the couch to examine it. I opened the flap and looked inside. There was a single sheet of blank paper. No writing, no signature, nothing. It felt strange in my hands, but I tried to brush off the feeling. I placed it on the coffee table, made a simple dinner, and tried to move on with my evening. I couldn't shake a sense of unease as I ate. The envelope was still there, silent and ordinary on the surface. I kept glancing over at it like it might do something. Once I finished dinner, I picked it up again. I turned it around in my hands. The paper was thick and smooth. My fingertips tingled when I touched it. I held the blank page up to the light looking for hidden words or watermarks. I saw absolutely nothing. That should have been enough to make me toss it in the trash, but I couldn't do it. I left it on the table and went to my bedroom. That night, I struggled to fall asleep. My head was full of questions. Why did I feel so attached to a blank piece of paper? Where did it come from? Was it a prank? I rolled around in bed trying to get comfortable. After about an hour, I finally drifted off. Sometime later, I jerked awake. My heart was pounding, and I felt sweat on my forehead. I thought I heard a knocking sound. It was very soft, like someone was gently tapping on my front door. I sat up, listened for a moment, and heard nothing else. I tried to calm my breathing. My digital clock showed it was a little past 2 a.m. I felt an urge to check the envelope even though I knew it was still on the table. I fought that urge for a minute, but it kept growing. I got up, walked down the hallway, and flicked on the living room light. The envelope was exactly where I left it, but it looked different. The surface seemed to ripple in the bright light like its texture had changed. I picked it up and ran my thumb across it. It had a slight grainy feel, and I could see faint shapes shifting on the paper. They were gone in a second, but I knew I saw them. I stood there, my heart thumping hard. My hands felt a little shaky. I placed the envelope back on the table and stepped away. I thought about putting it in a drawer or somewhere out of sight, but something told me not to. It felt like I was afraid to trap it or hide it. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the way the envelope's texture shifted. I had never seen anything like that. I listened for more knocks, but the apartment stayed quiet for the rest of the night. When my alarm went off in the morning, I felt exhausted and tense. I got ready for work, ate a quick breakfast, and glanced at the envelope again. It looked normal now. It was smooth and blank, like any regular piece of mail. I poked it with my finger. It didn't feel special anymore, but I still sensed something strange about it. I decided to bring it with me, so I stuffed it in my backpack. I wasn't sure why, but I didn't want to leave it alone in my home. At work, I felt distracted. I couldn't focus on my tasks, and I kept thinking about the envelope. During my lunch break, I took it out. I held it under the fluorescent lights of the office. A few of my coworkers looked over, but nobody asked me about it. I ran my fingertips along the paper again, but nothing felt unusual. I put it away and forced myself to get back to work. By the time I drove home, the sun was setting. My apartment felt heavier when I walked in. The air was stale, and my living room looked darker than usual. I flipped on the lights. I dropped my backpack on the couch and took out the envelope. I set it on the coffee table and stared at it for a moment. The evening went by slowly. I made dinner, but I felt uneasy while chopping vegetables and waiting for the food to cook. Every so often, I glanced at the envelope. It stayed still and blank. I ate, washed my plate, and then sat down on the couch to watch some TV. I tried to relax, but I kept checking the envelope. I told myself I was being irrational. It was just paper. But I felt that same tingling energy in my arms every time I looked at it. Around midnight, I turned off the TV and got ready for bed. I stared at the envelope one more time and decided to leave it on the coffee table again. I wanted to see if the texture changed overnight. I walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and lay down in the dark. My muscles were tense. and I felt my pulse beating in my temples. I tried slow breathing. Eventually, I dozed off. Sometime deep into the night, I heard the same soft knocking sound. It was too quiet to come from outside. It sounded closer, like it was right at my bedroom door. My eyes flew open, and I sat up. My heart hammered in my chest. The knock repeated, tap, tap. I stepped out of bed and listened. My mouth felt dry. I took a few steps toward the door, wondering if I should open it. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing. The knocking stopped. I opened the door and looked into the hallway. It was dark, but I could see the outline of the living room. The coffee table was in its usual spot, and the envelope sat on top. I couldn't see any movement, but I felt a presence. It was like something was waiting for me to come closer. I turned on the hallway light and walked into the living room. The envelope's surface was shifting again. It looked like small waves moving across the paper. I took a step back. My chest felt tight and my breathing got shallow. I thought about throwing it away or burning it, but I couldn't make my body move in that direction. Instead, I reached out and touched the envelope. My skin prickled from my fingertips to my shoulder. I saw quick flashes of shapes, but they were too fast for me to identify. They almost looked like letters, but they vanished before I could read anything. The knocking sound echoed in my head, though it wasn't happening anymore. I felt drawn to open the envelope again, so I lifted the flap and looked inside. The paper inside was still blank, but I swore I felt a pulse in my hand. I felt like I should hold it closer to my face, so I did. I stared at the paper, waiting for words to appear. Nothing happened. I realized I was standing there in my t-shirt and shorts, trembling in the middle of the night. I slid the paper back into the envelope, placed it on the table, and walked backward until I reached my bedroom door. Then I shut it and locked it, even though I'd never bothered to lock it before. In the morning, I got up feeling groggy. I walked into the living room, half expecting to see the envelope floating or torn into pieces. But it was right where I left it, looking normal again. I decided to test something. I grabbed a lighter from my kitchen drawer and went back to the coffee table. I flicked it on near the corner of the envelope. I held the flame close, but my hand started shaking. A wave of nausea hit me, and I pulled away. My chest felt tight, and I lost my nerve. I set the lighter aside and realized I was too nervous to destroy it. Instead, I picked it up carefully and stuffed it into a large plastic zip bag. I zipped it shut and put it in a wooden box that I had for storage. I placed the box in a closet near my front door. Then I grabbed my keys and headed out to work, hoping that might contain whatever was happening. All day I thought about that soft knocking sound. I also remembered the shapes on the paper. I tried to picture them clearly, but I couldn't form a solid image in my head. They were like flickers that vanished too quickly. I stayed late at the office because I felt anxious about coming home. By the time I got back, it was almost 9 at night. My apartment was dark. I turned on every light I could. I checked the closet. The box was still there and the envelope was still inside the zip bag. I breathed a small sigh of relief. I made a sandwich and tried to keep my mind off the envelope. I watched a movie, flipping channels, and eventually started nodding off. The day had been exhausting. I turned off the TV and lights except for a small lamp in the living room. Then I went to my bedroom and left my door open, just to see if I would hear anything again. I woke up a few hours later to that familiar knock. It was soft but persistent. This time it came from the direction of my front door. I turned on my bedside lamp, got out of bed, and slowly walked to the living room. I checked the closet. My heart sank. The closet door was open by a few inches. I was certain I had shut it. I switched on the closet light and saw the wooden box. The lid was closed, but the box was on the opposite side of the shelf from where I left it. I reached for it, feeling shaky. I placed it on the floor and lifted the lid. The plastic zip bag was still sealed. The envelope was inside, resting at an angle. It looked a little crooked, like it had moved somehow. I zipped open the bag and picked up the envelope. It felt warm to the touch. That strong, tingling sensation crawled up my arms again. I thought I heard a faint whisper, but it could have been the wind outside. I ran to my bedroom, pulled out an old backpack, and shoved the envelope inside it. I zipped the backpack shut and tossed it in the corner. Then I leaned against the wall, my breathing fast. I was wide awake. The presence felt stronger, like the air was charged. I stayed there for a long time, staring at the backpack. Eventually, I sat on the edge of my bed, my mind racing with questions. I stared at the time on my phone. It was close to 4 a.m. I didn't sleep again that night. Instead, I kept watch over the backpack, expecting it to move or shift. It didn't. When the sun came up, I made coffee, but I could barely drink it because my stomach felt uneasy. I decided I needed to do something. I grabbed the backpack, hopped into my car, and drove out of the city. I found a secluded spot near some fields. I stopped the car, got out, and pulled the envelope from the backpack. I looked at it one last time under the bright morning sun. It looked completely ordinary. I placed it on the ground near some tall grass. Then I got back in my car, started the engine, and drove away. I felt a tightness in my chest, but I forced myself to keep going. When I arrived home, my apartment felt lighter. I walked around, checking each room. The atmosphere felt normal. I didn't hear any knocking sounds, and I didn't feel that strange energy. I ate a calm dinner for the first time in days and tried to enjoy a quiet evening. But late that night, while I was lying in bed, I heard a faint tapping on my front door. It was the same gentle knock I had heard before. My pulse raced. I crept to the door, my hands shaking. I stared through the peephole and saw nothing. There was no one outside in the hallway. I stood there for a few seconds, unsure what to do. I didn't want to open the door, but I also couldn't ignore it. Finally, I pulled the door open a crack and looked around. Nobody was there. The hallway lights were dim and the area was empty. I stepped out for a moment, feeling my nerves on edge. Everything was silent. I went back in and locked the door. My mind jumped to the envelope again and a chill spread through my body. I wondered if it had followed me back somehow, or if the presence had never really left. I sat in my living room, gripping the arm of my chair. My legs felt stiff. The knocking continued in my head like an echo I couldn't escape. I tried to sleep, but I kept waking up every hour, thinking I heard footsteps or quiet taps on the walls. Each time, I sat up and listened. After a few long minutes, I would lie back down and close my eyes. When morning came, I felt drained. I dragged myself through my routine, took a shower, and got dressed. My thoughts kept returning to that envelope. I left it in the field, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still connected to it. When I stepped outside to leave for work, I half expected to see it sitting on my doormat. There was nothing there, just a normal morning scene. Now I'm not sure what's happening or how to stop it. I still sense that presence in my apartment, especially at night when everything is quiet. I sometimes stand near my door, listening for knocks. My hands tremble when I think about those shapes I saw on the envelope. They might have been words or maybe just random patterns. I'm not sure if this thing wants me to do something or if it's just here to unsettle me. I haven't told anyone about it because I'm afraid they'll think I'm imagining all of this. But I know what I felt and I know what I heard. I'm hoping it fades over time. Until then, I keep checking the corners of my living room and my hallway, waiting for something to appear. I keep my doors locked at night and I sleep with a light on. I still hear that knocking sometimes, although it comes and goes. My heart rate speeds up every time, and the hair on my arms stands on end. When I open the door, there's never anyone there. I can't explain it, and I don't know if it will ever stop. All I know is that the envelope left a mark I can't remove. The presence remains, and I'm stuck with it, waiting for the next knock. I still remember the moment I realized I was trapped on that endless curve. It happened without any big warning or dramatic buildup. One moment, I was driving under a sky with a full moon, trying to find the right turnoff. The next, I noticed I'd been turning the wheel forever and the road didn't straighten out. There was no gradual transition into a nightmare. It was like flicking a switch from normal to terrifying. One second, I thought I recognized a bend in the road. The next, I saw that same tree with a warped trunk and crumbling bark. That's when I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, and I knew something was very wrong. I'd been on a business trip since early morning. I was running on strong coffee and a half-eaten sandwich from some gas station hours before. My shirt stuck to my back because my car's air conditioning was on the fritz, and the night was unusually warm. The only light came from my headlights and that bright moon overhead. I expected to reach a motel around 10 in the evening, check in, maybe grab a shower and crash. But at 9:30, my GPS started acting up, losing signal and telling me to take roads that didn't exist. I tried resetting it, but it froze. I fiddled with my phone, but I had no service. I kept driving, thinking I'd eventually find a landmark or a sign. Instead, I saw a battered old wooden marker that pointed to some county route I'd never heard of. It looked half rotten, but I had no other reference points. So I took that turn, hoping it would lead me back to the main highway. Everything after that felt slow, yet it happened so fast. The more I drove, the darker it seemed to get. The moon gave me enough light to see a few yards off to the sides. I noticed tree branches that twisted in odd angles, with bark peeling in large strips. The leaves looked shriveled, even though it was early autumn. I remember hearing crickets at first, but then I realized the night was growing quiet. The only sound was my engine and my tires on the pavement. My heart started pounding, and I could feel a cold sweat forming on my forehead. I kept wiping my palms on my pants because they were clammy against the steering wheel. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It said 10:15 p.m., which meant I'd been on that road for at least 45 minutes. I hadn't seen a single building or house. No other cars passed me. No reflective signs appeared, and my cell phone still had no signal. There was a point when I told myself I just needed to stay calm. I leaned forward, peering through the windshield. Up ahead, the road curved to the right. The asphalt looked cracked with weeds growing in the gaps. On the shoulder, there was a rusted fence that stretched about 10 feet and then disappeared into a thicket of tangled brush. When I followed the curve, I spotted the same warped tree with a trunk that seemed to bulge in the middle. The same broken fence was there too, the same old weeds. I felt my stomach tighten again, and a jolt ran through my body. I recognized it. I had seen it at least 3 times already. My hands started shaking on the wheel. I told myself to pull over, but I kept driving, thinking maybe I was imagining it. Then I spotted a patch of road where the asphalt looked like a giant pothole had been filled with bright new tar. The shape of it was almost a triangle, and there was a weird groove running through it. I passed that same spot a few minutes before. Seeing it again made me press the gas pedal harder, hoping I could outrun whatever was happening. My heart thumped harder and my neck felt stiff. I couldn't stop swallowing, and my eyes burned from staring too long. I thought about turning the car around, but the road was narrow with a ditch on one side and a drop-off on the other. The best I could do was a 3-point turn if I found enough space, but the curve just kept winding, like it was spiraling into nowhere. I slowed to a crawl, checking both sides for a good place to turn. The headlights revealed twisted roots and brush that didn't look safe for driving. Each time I rounded the bend, I ended up facing that same stretch of guardrail. It looked buckled in the middle, as if something had hit it years ago. My chest tightened. My breath came in short bursts. I muttered to myself, "This can't be real. This can't be real." Somewhere around my 5th time seeing that cracked section of asphalt, I finally pulled the car onto the shoulder. My headlights illuminated more dried brush and a patch of dirt. I could feel every beat of my heart in my temples. My throat felt thick, and my tongue was dry. I turned off the engine, but I left the headlights on. The silence that settled around me felt heavy. No wind, no chirping insects, nothing. I stared at the darkness beyond the headlights for a few seconds. I wanted to see any movement or shape that might explain this, but there was nothing, just stillness. I fumbled for my flashlight in the glove box. My hand trembled as I clicked it on. I opened the door, and the hinges squeaked loudly in the quiet night. When my shoes hit the pavement, I felt the heat from the road radiating up my legs. It was warmer than it should have been. The air felt thick and muggy, like a humid summer night, but it was late in the season. It didn't make any sense. My shirt clung to me, damp with sweat. Each breath felt heavier than the last. I walked a few paces behind my car, shining the flashlight on the asphalt. At first, I saw tire marks and some scattered pebbles. Then I noticed something odd. The marks looked like they overlapped each other in a strange pattern. I followed them with the beam of light, and they curved off to the right, forming an arc that circled around to the front of my car. I stepped carefully, trying not to trip over the uneven road. My legs felt unsteady, like I might collapse if I didn't concentrate on each step. I moved around to the passenger side and saw more tire marks. They were arranged in loops, crossing over themselves. I realized with a jolt that the lines formed shapes I'd never seen before. It wasn't just random skid marks or normal traction lines. They intersected at angles, almost like some crude design stamped repeatedly on the road. I crouched down, aiming the flashlight at the center of one pattern. My breath caught in my throat. It looked intentional. I took a step back, and my shoe slipped on a small rock. I nearly fell backward, but I caught myself. My heart hammered even harder. There were at least 5 or 6 of these distinct shapes spread across the curve, each formed by the path of my car tires. I turned off the flashlight for a second to see if maybe the shapes were more visible under the headlights. In the glow, the dark rubber arcs on the asphalt still appeared. They joined together in wide loops, then tapered into thin lines. Each time they met, they formed a repeating symbol I couldn't recognize. I felt a surge of nausea. A sudden impulse hit me, and I stood up straight. I walked a few yards away, to where a large cluster of weeds pushed up through a crack in the asphalt. I forced my eyes to scan the entire curve. I saw those same silhouettes of dead-looking trees in the distance. The branches were twisted, as if they'd grown in circles. The moon overhead stayed in the same spot, bright and cold, shining down on me. I stared at it, half hoping it would move or that a cloud would pass by. But it remained frozen. My arms broke out in goosebumps, and my teeth chattered a bit, even though the night felt warm. I kept thinking, I'm stuck here. Time's not moving. I decided I had to try driving again. I thought maybe if I reversed the entire way, I could break the cycle. I got back in the car, started the engine, and put it in reverse. The headlights still pointed ahead, so my rear view and side mirrors were my main guides. I pressed the gas, inching backward. The car rumbled over the rough asphalt. The reflection of the taillights flickered on the brush. My heart pounded as the speedometer crept past 10 miles per hour. I could feel my jaw clench so hard that my teeth hurt. I kept going for what felt like 10 minutes. All I saw behind me was that looping road always bending to the right. I passed the same warped tree trunk, the same broken guardrail. I watched them appear in the mirrors, then fade away. Then they came back again. It was the same repeating loop in reverse. My breathing grew shallow, my pulse hammered in my ears. I felt pinned by panic, but I refused to stop yet. I forced myself to keep rolling back. Eventually, I noticed my gas gauge had dipped below a quarter tank. I realized I had been burning fuel all this time, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep going. My throat tightened. I muttered, "No, no, no," under my breath. I slowed the car to a stop in the middle of the road. I slammed the steering wheel with my palm. The horn honked, a sharp blast that startled me. It sounded unnaturally loud in the still air. I looked around for any reaction. Nothing changed. It felt like I was the only person left on Earth. I turned off the car again. Then I just sat there with my eyes closed, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I could hear the ticking of the engine as it cooled. My breaths came in ragged bursts. My mind raced with questions. Was I dreaming? Did I take a wrong turn onto some private land? Did I cross some boundary without noticing? These thoughts rushed through my head, but I couldn't settle on any logical explanation. My shoulders shook, and sweat dripped down my temples. After a minute, I decided to check the road on foot again. I opened the door and stepped out. This time, the night air felt even heavier. My car's headlights shone ahead, revealing the same battered fence about 40 feet away. I grabbed the flashlight and started walking toward it. The ground felt unsteady under my feet, like it might shift. Every time I moved, I expected something to jump out from behind a tree or from a ditch, but everything remained still. My skin tingled and I felt a hollow ache in my chest. When I reached the fence, I saw rust flakes on the metal. I ran my hand over a loose wire, and it snapped off at the touch. The wood post holding up the fence looked blackened near the base, as if burned. I pointed the flashlight at the brush below. I saw broken branches and dried leaves. No footprints or tracks, no sign of any animal. Just emptiness. The quiet was absolute. My ears rang with it. I turned off the flashlight again to see if there was any natural light. The moon lit the surroundings enough for me to see more twisted trees. Their branches reached out in crooked angles. The fence disappeared into a mass of dark foliage. I couldn't tell how far it went. The road behind me formed that same curve, fading into darkness. I felt like I was walking in a sealed bubble. I decided to return to my car. I took one last look at the fence and turned around. My legs felt weak and I stumbled a bit when my foot caught on a rock. I cursed under my breath and kept moving. Back at the car, I tried turning the engine on and off a couple times, just to see if the headlights would flicker or if something might change. The engine sounded normal, but it didn't bring me comfort. I felt trapped in a loop and I didn't know how to break free. I looked at my phone. Still no signal. The battery was at 50%. I thought about using the flashlight to leave the car behind and walk back the way I came, but I was at least an hour's drive off the main road. That could mean hours on foot in complete darkness. I had a flashlight, but I didn't feel safe abandoning the car. The emptiness around me felt suffocating enough with the car close by. If I lost it, I'd be stranded with nothing but the clothes on my back. My chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. I tried to calm myself, counting backward from 10. I told myself to think clearly. I checked the rearview mirror. It reflected the road behind me, same as it ever was, the curve illuminated in the red glow of the taillights. I glanced out the window. The moon was still in the same spot in the sky, shining with an intense light that made me squint. I could see my breath fogging the windshield now, even though it felt warm outside. I wiped the glass with my sleeve. The smudge it left behind felt greasy. I thought I smelled a faint odor, maybe sulfur or burnt rubber, but I wasn't sure. It vanished before I could pinpoint it. I started the car again. My stomach churned, and I noticed I was starving, but I had no appetite. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel. I put the car in drive and eased forward, trying a slow pace. The road curved to the right once again. I followed it carefully, watching the edges for any sign of a side road or a driveway, anything that might lead me out of this loop. The tires crunched over a patch of gravel, and the suspension bounced a little. Then the asphalt smoothed out, and I recognized the crack that formed a triangle shape. The pattern began again. I clenched my teeth and let out a frustrated groan. After some minutes, I saw the old fence on my right once more. Everything repeated like clockwork. I pressed the brake and came to a stop. I tapped my fingers on the wheel, breathing heavily. My heart pounded and my head throbbed. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment. Then I opened them and stared at the gauge cluster. I watched the second hand on the clock. It didn't move. The digital minutes displayed the same time as before. I watched it for a good 15 seconds. Nothing changed. My mouth went dry, and a small tremor ran down my spine. I felt like screaming. Instead, I turned the steering wheel sharply left. I pressed the accelerator, hoping the car would hop the ditch and maybe cut across the land. The tires spun on loose gravel. The car lurched forward, but then the front wheels dipped into a shallow rut. I slammed the brakes. The vehicle rocked back and forth, and I nearly hit my head on the steering wheel. My heartbeat hammered so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The car was stuck at an angle, leaning slightly, but still able to move backward. I shifted into reverse and eased it out of the rut. Then I found myself back on the road, facing that endless curve. My frustration turned into a sickening dread. I let go of the wheel for a moment. My hands fell to my lap and I stared at them. They were covered in sweat, and my fingers twitched. I felt a numbness in my arms, like they were losing circulation. My breath hitched and I swallowed a lump in my throat. I realized I was shaking, my legs jittering against the seat. My gaze flicked to the side mirror. I saw the black outline of trees and the faint glimmer of the moonlight on the guardrail. I shifted my attention to the asphalt. The tire marks were everywhere, layered upon each other. They formed that bizarre symbol again and again. The shapes crisscrossed the entire curve, like I'd been driving in circles for hours. I didn't want to leave the car, but I had to see them again up close. I needed to understand what they were. Maybe I was just paranoid, reading patterns into random skid marks. So I grabbed the flashlight and stepped out one more time. I moved to the middle of the lane and leaned over, shining the beam. The shapes were definitely repeating. They formed loops that connected at sharp angles. Each loop merged into a circular shape. In some spots, the rubber was layered so thick it was darker than the rest of the asphalt. My mouth hung open and I felt a tremor in my legs. I touched one section with my fingertips. It felt sticky. A strong odor hit my nose. Burnt rubber. I recoiled. My stomach flipped. I wiped my fingers on my pants and stepped back. I heard a soft creak behind me. I whirled around, shining the flashlight into the darkness. Nothing moved. The trees stood still. Twisted branches turned in my direction as if they were pointing. My chest felt tight and my ears rang with tension. A wave of dizziness hit me, and I had to steady myself with one hand on the hood of my car. For a moment, I didn't know what else to do. My body felt drained. I hadn't slept properly in more than 20 hours, and my mind was racing. The unstoppable curve, the eerie silence, that symbol made by my own tires, none of it seemed possible. But I was living it, and I couldn't figure out how to escape. I stared at my car's headlights, and for a second they flickered. My heart lurched. Then they went back to normal. I exhaled a shaky breath. I got back into the driver's seat and locked the doors. I don't know why I locked them. It just felt like the only thing I could control. My body tensed, and I gripped the steering wheel. I felt the vibration of the engine through my arms. My breathing sounded too loud in the confined space. I glanced at the gas gauge. It was getting closer to empty. My eyes burned with exhaustion. I rubbed them, trying to clear my vision. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, letting out a low groan. I didn't have a clue how long I could keep going, but I had to keep trying. I couldn't stay there forever, watching the same curve repeat like a broken record. My pulse hammered as I put the car in gear again, bracing myself for another attempt at finding a way out. The headlights illuminated that haunting curve ahead, and I drove forward into the darkness, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach and the sweat trickling down my face. I had no idea if I'd ever see the end of that road, but I had to keep moving. I never planned to rely on that old train to get home, but my schedule forced me onto those tracks night after night. I remember the first time I saw it roll in. It was around 1:45 in the morning, and I was standing on a nearly deserted platform. The lights along the station were dim, and the few fluorescent bulbs that still worked flickered off and on, so it felt like the place was breathing. I felt tired, and my feet hurt from a long shift. I just wanted to sit down and close my eyes for a bit. When I heard the train's rumble in the distance, I felt relieved. I didn't think twice about its old design or the strange grinding noise it made as it pulled up. I just wanted to get inside and get home. I stepped into the first car I found. The door squeaked as I pushed it aside, and my shoes scraped against the grimy floor. The overhead lights were weak, but they allowed enough visibility for me to find a seat. There were a few people scattered in the car. They looked like regular late-night commuters. Nobody spoke to each other. I saw a man a few rows ahead of me who kept his eyes on the floor, and I noticed a woman near the back staring out the window like she was counting the telephone poles we passed. The train smelled like old leather, stale coffee, and metal shavings. It wasn't comfortable, but I'd been on worse. I settled into a seat close to the exit doors. The seat's vinyl covering had rips and tears and a metal spring pressed against my thigh. I was too tired to look for a better spot. My eyes started drifting shut, and I remember the warm hum of the train engine lulling me into a half-sleep. Nobody said anything over the speakers until we left the last station in that stretch. After that, the train just went on, and the windows showed nothing but darkness, broken by the occasional flicker of a passing light outside. I think it was right before 2 a.m. when I noticed something shift. The lights above me began to flicker in a slow pattern. It reminded me of how fluorescent bulbs act when they're about to die. But they didn't go out. They just kept stuttering. I straightened up and looked around. The man in front of me wasn't there anymore. The woman who had been staring out the window was gone too. I hadn't heard anyone leave, and I hadn't noticed the train stopping anywhere. That's when I heard the speakers crackle. The voice that came through didn't sound like English, Spanish, or any language I recognized. It had a harsh tone, like static mixed with guttural syllables. I felt my chest tighten. I checked my phone for the time. It was exactly 2 a.m. The voice continued for a few seconds, then cut off. No one else was in the car with me, so I couldn't ask what was going on. I felt a chill run along my arms. I looked out the window, but I only saw darkness. When the lights flickered again, I noticed shapes on the other side of the car. They weren't there before. At first, they looked like shadows. Then I realized they were people. At least, they looked like people. There were 3 or 4 of them. All of them wore clothes that looked outdated, jackets and hats you might see in old photographs. One man had on a vest and a tie. A woman wore a long coat that reached her ankles. They were all looking straight at me. Their eyes felt cold, like they were sizing me up or waiting for something. I remember my throat went dry. I tried to swallow, but my mouth felt like sandpaper. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't form the words. The lights flickered again and their eyes glowed for a split second. I gripped the seat cushion, feeling the torn vinyl under my fingers. I didn't smell anything different, but my body tensed, and my heartbeat picked up. I heard the overhead speaker crackle again, and that same strange voice came through, speaking the same odd syllables. The silhouettes remained silent, just watching me. The train rattled along the tracks. I heard the wheels squeal underneath us. I felt a sway as we took a curve. I could see farmland or forest outside, but it was mostly just a blur of darkness. The passengers who had been there when I got on never returned. It was just me and those silent figures at the far end of the car. After a few minutes, I couldn't stand it anymore. I stood up and took a step toward them. My legs shook, and my stomach felt uneasy. But I wanted to see if they were real people or if I was half asleep. As soon as I moved in their direction, they all turned their heads away like they were looking out the window. I stopped. I felt a rush of adrenaline, and my breathing became uneven. Then the lights flickered again. The figures were gone. I stared at the row of seats where they had been sitting. They were empty. I looked behind me, toward the entrance of the car. No one was there. I scanned every seat. I didn't see anyone else. The train felt quiet, except for the engine's constant groan. My arms felt stiff and my neck tingled. I checked the time on my phone again. It said 2:04 a.m. For the next few minutes, I stayed alert. I kept looking around, waiting for something else to happen. My palms were sweaty, and I kept wiping them on my pants. The overhead lights returned to a steady glow, and I thought maybe it was all just a weird dream. But I stayed awake and upright until the train reached my stop at around 2:30 a.m. When the doors opened, I hurried out. I looked back at the train, and I swear the metal frame looked less solid, like I could see the station lights through its windows. But then it pulled away, and I was left standing on the platform. I didn't tell anyone the next day. I felt embarrassed. I told myself it was just exhaustion. I went about my life as usual. My job required late hours, so once again I found myself at that station, waiting for the same train. I glanced at my phone before it arrived. It was 1:50 a.m. I didn't see any other train listed on the schedules that late, but I heard the whistle, and soon enough, I saw it coming. It was the same old train, squeaking and rattling. The same door squeaked when I stepped inside. I saw a few people in the car again, but they looked different from the ones I'd seen the previous night. They all seemed drained. One man wore a hoodie and kept his head down. A woman in a faded sweater was holding a small suitcase on her lap. Nobody made eye contact with me. I took a seat. We rode in silence. I stayed alert, trying to see if anyone would vanish at some point. Nobody did, at least not at first. A few minutes before 2 MR, I felt the train slow down. I didn't see a station outside, but we were clearly moving at a crawl. The lights overhead began to flicker again. The speakers crackled. That same strange language blasted through the car. It made my skin prickle. The man in the hoodie looked up suddenly, like he heard something that spooked him. The woman with the suitcase clutched it tighter. I could see her knuckles turn white. The lights flickered faster. I heard a buzzing sound near my seat. The temperature felt like it dropped a few degrees, and I got goosebumps on my arms. I looked down the aisle and I saw those old-style passengers again. They stood at the opposite end, just like before. This time, there were more of them. I counted at least 6. All of them were looking in my direction. I felt a rush of panic, and I glanced at the other commuters to see if they noticed. They seemed frozen. The man in the hoodie stared straight ahead. The woman with the suitcase had her eyes shut. No one else in the car reacted to those old passengers standing there. I heard a hiss of air. I looked out the window and saw a faint outline of trees passing by. Then I heard the train's horn. It echoed in the night. I stood up, trying to keep my balance as the car shook. I took a slow step toward the strangers. They didn't move. The overhead lights flickered again, and for a brief moment I saw their faces more clearly. Their eyes looked sunken, and their clothes had stains and wrinkles. A man in a bowler hat had dirt on his collar. A woman wore gloves that seemed torn at the fingertips. I felt my stomach tighten. My breathing got shallow. I wanted to get off the train, but I had nowhere else to go. We were moving. I reached for the handle on the door to the next car, hoping I could put some distance between me and those people. The door wouldn't open. I tugged harder, but it stayed locked. I felt sweat trickle down my neck. Then the speakers made that crackling sound again. The same guttural announcement repeated, and my ears rang from the harsh tone. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block it out. When the noise stopped, I turned around. The old passengers were standing right in front of me, maybe 3 feet away. I stumbled backward and almost fell. My heart pounded, and my arms felt shaky. They all stared at me for a few seconds. Then the lights flickered again. When they steadied, the group was gone. I looked around the car. The other commuters were slumped in their seats as if nothing had happened. I stayed standing until we reached my stop. I hurried off as soon as the door slid open. The platform was empty. The night air felt cool on my face. I turned to watch the train leave. For a second, it looked transparent. I could see the faded ad signs on the opposite platform through its windows. Then it pulled away and disappeared into the darkness. After the second night, I tried to figure out if there was any official record of that train. I asked around at the station's information desk. They told me there shouldn't be any train running at that hour on that route. I tried to show them my ticket, but it was just a faded piece of paper with no date. I told them about the old cars and the flickering lights, but they looked at me like I was confused or maybe delirious. I even checked the board that shows arrivals and departures. There was nothing listed for 1:50 a.m. or anywhere close to that time. I kept my mouth shut after that. I had to keep working late, so the next night, I showed up to the station again. It was 1:40 a.m. I didn't see anyone else on the platform. I decided to stand under a working light this time, where I could see the tracks more clearly. I waited until I heard the familiar rumble. At 1:50 a.m., there it was, the same old train. The conductor's car had grime on the windows. The metal side had patches of rust. The squeak of the brakes echoed through the empty station. The doors opened with a groan, like the train was reluctant to let me in. I stepped into the car. A single man sat near the front. He wore a dark suit and had a briefcase on his lap. He nodded at me but didn't speak. I nodded back. We rode in silence for about 10 minutes. I watched the digital clock on my phone. As it closed in on 2 a.m., I clenched my fists, waiting for the flickering lights. Right on time, the lights dimmed. The overhead speaker crackled. That same voice poured out, and my chest tightened. I looked at the man in the suit. He stared straight at me and his eyes looked blank. I felt a wave of tension crawl up my back. Then a spark flew from one of the lights. The train rattled and I heard a rattling sound like something loose under the floor. I turned toward the back of the car and I saw them again. Those old passengers in their outdated clothes. They were pressed against the windows this time, and their faces were only inches from the glass. They stared inside, watching me. Their eyes followed my every movement. I stepped back until I bumped into a seat. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. The train lurched forward. The overhead speaker squealed and the lights flickered. In that split second of darkness, I heard something scrape against the window. Then the lights came back on and the figures were gone. I felt my pulse thudding in my temples. The man in the suit still looked at me. He lifted his briefcase and clutched it to his chest, but he didn't say a word. His lips were parted slightly, like he was breathing through his mouth. When we reached my station, I jumped out. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just wanted to be off that train. I hurried across the platform, heading for the exit. I turned around to watch the train leave, and once again, it looked translucent. The edges of the cars shimmered, and I saw the station lights through the windows. Then it vanished into the night, and I was left wondering if I had actually seen it disappear, or if it was just a trick of the eyes. Since then, I've tried to take a bus or hitch a ride with a coworker, but some nights I have no choice. I keep seeing that train show up, and I keep ending up on it. The routine is always the same. Around 2 a.m., the lights flicker, the speakers broadcast that strange language, and those silent figures appear. Their clothing always looks worn out, like it's from another era. They never speak. They just stare. Or sometimes they appear at the windows. Then they vanish. And when I get off at my station, the train leaves with that ghostly shimmer. By the time I walk out to the parking lot, I feel like I can't catch my breath. My muscles are tense, and I sweat like I've been running. I've checked local records. I've looked online. I've asked station attendants on different shifts. Nobody has an explanation. The schedule boards don't list it. If I ask too many questions, people assume I'm joking or that I made it up. But I know what I've seen. I can feel the worn seats under me every time I ride. I can smell the old metal and see the flickering overhead lights. I can hear those passengers shifting in and out of my car when 2 a.m. hits. Now, every time I step onto that platform at night, I brace myself. I feel my heart race at 1:45 a.m. I grip my phone like it's a lifeline, and I wait. The rumbling sound approaches in the distance, and I see that old train round the bend. It screeches to a stop, and the doors slide open. I step inside because I have no other way to get home. I wonder if one night it'll take me somewhere I can't come back from, or if it's just an old train nobody remembers. I watch the windows, waiting for those outlines. They always appear. They always stare in silence. And when we reach my stop, they vanish along with the train's solidity. I see the platform lights right through its walls. Then I step off, and the train slides away into the darkness. I still don't know if it's real, or if it's some sort of portal to a place I don't understand. I just know that at 2 a.m., my senses sharpen, and my nerves go on high alert. I hear that announcement in a language I've never heard anywhere else. I see those passengers with empty eyes and old clothes, and I wonder how long this can keep happening before something changes. That's all I can say for sure. I ride this thing and see those same events. The train feels solid, yet it looks almost see-through when it leaves. There are no official records of it, and no one at the station can confirm its existence. But I've been on it too many times to doubt what I've experienced. It shows up. It carries me through the early morning hours. At 2 a.m., it reveals something I can't explain. Then it leaves me at my station with a dull ache in my legs and a dry taste in my mouth. Every night I ride it, I keep asking myself if it's real or if I'm trapped in some loop that no one else knows about. I'm still not sure. but I keep going back because I have to, because I can't get home otherwise. And every time that clock ticks toward 2 a.m., I feel my pulse racing, and I get ready for the flicker of the lights and those silent stares. Maybe one day I'll find out the truth. For now, I just live with it and hope it doesn't take me somewhere else for good. Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I moved into this old apartment 3 weeks ago. I picked it because it was cheap and because the neighborhood looked quiet. I saw the hallway, the creaky floors, and the faded paint on the walls. I noticed the small trap door in the ceiling the first time I walked through. There was no set of stairs, no pull-down ladder, no visible way to reach it. The landlord told me it led to a small attic space. He warned me not to open it under any circumstances. He said it was unsafe. He refused to give details, and I didn't push for more information. I thought it was just another quirk of an older place, but I was wrong. On my first night, everything was peaceful until around 2 in the morning. I woke up to a soft thumping noise above my head. It sounded like slow footsteps. I stayed in bed, eyes open, heart pounding. I tried to convince myself it was just the old building settling. Then I heard a low shuffle, like someone dragging a foot across the floorboards. I got up, turned on every light in the apartment, and looked around. My hands were sweating. My chest felt tight. I listened for a few minutes. There was only silence,